In the fog-choked streets of Victorian London, a black rose marks the chilling murders of the city's elite, each victim clutching a cryptic note. The order blooms. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson unravel a deadly conspiracy led by a shadowy figure from Holmes's own past. As the body count rises, they race to stop a secret society's plot to poison London's heart, where every clue unveils betrayal, and the truth could tear the Holmes family apart. Will they halt the Order's reign of terror before it blooms into chaos? Chapter 1. The First Rose. The fog clung to London like a shroud, its tendrils curling around the gas lamps that flickered weakly against the encroaching dusk. At 221B Baker Street, the fire in the grate crackled, casting a warm glow across the cluttered sitting room where Sherlock Holmes and I, Dr. John Watson, had settled for the evening. My friend, as was his habit on such quiet nights, reclined in his armchair, his violin resting idly across his lap, his long fingers tracing the strings without playing a note. The air was heavy with the scent of tobacco from his pipe, and I, engrossed in the evening's paper, was content to let the silence stretch between us. It was a rare moment of calm in a city that never truly slept. I glanced at Holmes, noting the faint furrow in his brow, a sign of restless thought, even in repose. "You've been unusually quiet tonight, Holmes," I ventured, folding the paper. "No case to stir your mind." Holmes's gray eyes flicked toward me, sharp and piercing, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. "The world, Watson, is never devoid of puzzles. It is merely a matter of finding one worth solving." He set the violin aside and reached for his pipe, puffing thoughtfully. "London teems with secrets, but most are mundane petty thefts, domestic squabbles. I crave something singular." As if in answer to his words, a sharp rap sounded at the door below. Mrs. Hudson's voice, muffled but firm, drifted up, followed by the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden interest, and I set my paper aside. Sensing the evening's tranquility was about to be shattered, the door swung open, revealing Inspector Lestrade, his face flushed from the cold, and his expression grim. His overcoat was damp with fog, and his bowler hat sat slightly askew, a testament to his haste. "Holmes, Watson," he said, nodding curtly, "I need your help. It's a bad business, very bad." Holmes leaned forward, his languor replaced by a hawk-like intensity. "Do enlighten us, Lestrade. What manner of bad business brings you to Baker Street at this hour?" Lestrade removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's Sir Edward Harrow, the merchant, found dead in his study not 2 hours ago. No signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds save for one peculiar detail." He paused, his dark eyes meeting Holmes's. A black rose was pinned to his chest. I felt a chill that had little to do with the drafty room. "A black rose," I echoed. "That's unusual." "Unnatural," Holmes corrected, his voice low. He rose abruptly, his dressing gown swirling about him. "A rose dyed black, no doubt. The symbolism is deliberate, theatrical. Tell me, Lestrade, was there anything else at the scene? A note, perhaps, a scent?" Lestrade blinked, clearly unprepared for the question. "You're uncanny, Holmes." "Yes, there was a note pinned beside the rose. It read, 'The order blooms,' and now that you mention it, there was a faint smell, like bitter almonds, perhaps." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Aconite, likely. A poison, subtle and deadly. Interesting." He clapped his hands together, his earlier ennui forgotten. "Watson, fetch your coat. We have a case." I needed no further urging. Within minutes, we were bundled into a hansom cab, rattling through the fog-choked streets toward Belgravia, where Sir Edward Harrow's grand townhouse stood. The journey was swift, though the fog slowed our progress, and Lestrade filled the silence with details. Sir Edward, a widower of 50, was a prominent figure in London's mercantile world, dealing in rare spices and silks from the East. He was known for his wealth, his shrewdness, and, according to Lestrade, his penchant for secrecy, kept to himself, mostly, the inspector said. No enemies we know of, but men like him always have shadows. Holmes said nothing, his gaze fixed on the passing street lamps. But I could see his mind working, piecing together fragments of the puzzle Lestrade had laid before him. The Harrow residence was a stately affair, all Georgian elegance with tall windows and ivy creeping up its brick facade. A constable stood guard at the door, his face pale under his helmet. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wax and polish, undercut by something sharper, less bitter almonds. We were led through a marble-floored hall to the study, where Sir Edward lay slumped over his desk, his head resting on a blotter stained with ink. I approached the body, my medical instincts taking over. Sir Edward was a heavy-set man, his face frozen in a grimace of pain. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated, and his lips bore a faint bluish tinge. The black rose, pinned to his waistcoat, was strikingly out of place, a dark, velvety bloom that seemed to absorb the light. Beside it, a small square of paper bore the words "The Order Blooms" in a neat, almost feminine script. Holmes circled the room like a predator, his eyes darting from the body to the surroundings. The study was richly furnished, mahogany shelves, lined with leather-bound books, a Persian rug underfoot, and a crystal decanter on a sideboard. The windows were shut, the curtains drawn, and the fire in the grate had burned low. Holmes knelt by the desk, examining the floor, then rose to inspect. The note and rose. "Died," he murmured, touching the petals. "The ink is fresh, applied with care. This is no common flower, Watson. It's a message." He sniffed the air near the body, his nose wrinkling. "Aconite, as I suspected. Administered how, though? No food or drink nearby, no visible wounds, save the pin of the rose." I examined the pin myself, noting its sharpness. "Could the poison have been on the pin?" I suggested. Holmes shook his head. "Unlikely. The dose would be insufficient. Aconite requires ingestion or significant exposure. Look here, though." He pointed to a faint smudge on Sir Edward's cuff, a trace of the same dark ink used on the rose. He handled something, inked, perhaps unknowingly. Lestrade, hovering nearby, coughed. "We've searched the room, Holmes. Nothing out of place, no signs of a break-in. The servants heard nothing, saw nothing. The butler found him when he didn't answer the bell for supper." Holmes's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Servants always see more than they admit, Lestrade. Let us speak with them." The butler, a stooped man named Graves, was summoned. His hands trembled as he recounted his evening. Sir Edward had been in his study since afternoon, working on correspondence. No visitors had called, and the house had been quiet. He was particular about his privacy. "Sir," Graves said, addressing Holmes, "always locked the study door when he worked." "And yet," Holmes said, "the door was unlocked when you found him." Graves hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. I thought it odd, but I assumed he'd forgotten." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Assumptions are dangerous. Mr. Graves, tell me, did Sir Edward receive any unusual packages or letters recently?" The butler frowned, then brightened. "There was a parcel yesterday, sir. A small box, wrapped in brown paper. He took it to his study himself." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "And where is this box now?" Graves shook his head. "I don't know, sir. It wasn't in the study when I found him." We returned to the study, where Holmes conducted a meticulous search. He crawled under the desk, peered behind books, and even tapped the walls for hidden compartments. At last, he found it, a small wooden box, tucked behind a row of ledgers on a lower shelf. It was empty, save for a faint residue of dark powder and a single black petal. "More of the ink," Holmes said, sniffing the powder. "Not poison, but a dye, likely used for the rose." "The box was meant to be found," Watson a taunt. Lestrade growing impatient, crossed his arms. "So, what's it all mean, Holmes? Who's this order, and why kill a merchant?" Holmes stood, brushing dust from his knees. "The order Lestrade is a shadow from the past, or so it seems. As for why Sir Edward was targeted, I suspect it's tied to his trade dealings. He dealt in rare goods, perhaps he crossed someone powerful. The rose, the note, the poison all point to a deliberate, symbolic act. This is not a crime of passion, but of calculation." We left the house as dawn began to break, the fog lifting to reveal a gray, drizzling morning. Holmes was silent in the cab, his mind clearly racing. I, too, was lost in thought, troubled by the theatricality of the murder. A black rose, a cryptic note, these were not the tools of a common criminal. They spoke of something deeper, darker, lurking beneath London's surface, back at Baker Street. Holmes lit his pipe and sank into his armchair, staring into the fire. "This is no ordinary case, Watson," he said at last. "The order blooms, a declaration, a challenge. We are dealing with a mind that delights in spectacle, yet operates with precision. Sir Edward was the first, but he will not be the last." I shuddered, the image of the black rose vivid in my mind. "What do we do next, Holmes?" He smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "We wait, Watson. The order will strike again, and when they do, we shall be ready. For now, I must consult my files. The symbol of the rose and serpent is not unknown to me, though its context eludes me. Tomorrow, we visit the British Museum. There are answers in its archives, if one knows where to look." As he spoke, I felt the familiar thrill of the chase, tempered by a growing unease. The black rose was a warning, a promise of more to come, and in that moment, I knew we were embarking on one of the most perilous cases of our career. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Holmes buried himself in his files, pulling out old newspaper clippings and scribbled notes on obscure societies. I, meanwhile, took to my journal, recording the details of the case as best I could. The fire burned low, and the fog pressed against the windows, a reminder of the mystery that awaited us. By evening, Holmes had found a lighter reference to a 17th century pamphlet mentioning a Brotherhood of the Black Rose, a group tied to alchemy and political intrigue. "It's a start," he said, tossing the pamphlet aside. "But we need more. The museum will tell us what this order truly is." I nodded, though my mind was still on the murder scene. The rose, the note, the poison, they were pieces of a puzzle I could not yet see. But I trusted Holmes, as I always had, to guide us through the darkness. That night, as I lay in bed, the image of Sir Edward's lifeless face haunted me. The black rose seemed to bloom in my dreams, its petals unfurling to reveal a shadow that whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered. I awoke with a start, the sound of Holmes's violin drifting through the walls, a restless, haunting melody that spoke of the battle to come. The next morning, we set out for the British Museum, the fog still lingering like a ghost over London. Holmes was in high spirits, his mind alight with the challenge of the case. "The game is afoot, Watson," he said as we stepped into the cab, "and I intend to win it." I could only hope he was right, for the shadow of the black rose loomed large, and I feared what we would find in its heart. Chapter 2. The Second Victim. The fog clung to the London dockyards like a shroud, thick and heavy, muffling the clatter of carts and the distant shouts of laborers. It was the sort of morning where the Thames seemed to exhale its secrets, each breath curling into the air with a damp, briny chill. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson navigated the narrow, cobbled paths between towering stacks of crates and barrels, their boots slipping slightly on the slick stones. The air carried the sharp temps of tar and salt, mingled with the faint rot of river mud. Holmes's keen eyes scanned the surroundings, his long coat flapping as he moved with purpose, while Watson, ever the faithful companion, kept pace, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. Inspector Lestrade had summoned them at dawn. his message terse but urgent. Another murder, another black rose. The news had come barely 12 hours after their examination of Sir Edward Harrow's body in his opulent Mayfair study. The wealthy merchant's death, marked by that peculiar dyed flower pinned to his chest, had set Holmes's mind ablaze with questions. Now, as they approached the crime scene, the detective's sharp features were taut with anticipation, his mind already sifting through possibilities. The dockyard was a labyrinth of activity, even in the early hours. Hauled crates, their breath visible in the cold, while foremen barked orders. The crime scene, however, was cordoned off by a ring of constables, their lanterns casting weak pools of light through the fog. Lestrade stood at the center, his wiry frame hunched against the chill, his face grim as he spotted Holmes and Watson. Approaching Holmes, Lestrade said, his voice clipped. "You're here. Good. It's another one, same as Harrow. Damned eerie, if you ask me." Holmes raised a hand, silencing the inspector. "Show me the body, Lestrade. Details not opinions." The inspector led them to a small, cluttered office tucked between two warehouses. The door hung ajar, its hinges creaking as a constable pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of ink and damp wood. A single oil lamp flickered on a desk, illuminating the slumped form of a man in a chair, his head lolled back, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, his face frozen in a rictus of pain. A black rose, its petals unnaturally dark, was pinned to his rough woolen jacket, the pin driven deep into the fabric. A slip of paper, folded neatly, was tucked beneath the flower, bearing the same cryptic phrase as before, "The order blooms." Holmes crouched beside the body, his gloved hands moving with precision. The victim was a burly man in his late 40s, his hands calloused, his clothes practical but well kept. A dockyard overseer, Lestrade had said, one William Carver. Holmes's fingers traced the edge of the rose, noting the faint sheen of dye that gave it its unnatural hue. He leaned closer, inhaling deeply, his nostrils flaring as he detected the same faint, bitter scent he'd noticed at Sir Edward's sinister, a deadly poison derived from monkshood. "No struggle," Holmes murmured, his eyes darting over the body. "No defensive wounds, no disarray in the room." The killer was precise, confident. This was no random act. Watson, peering over Holmes's shoulder, frowned. "Poison again, Holmes. The same as Sir Edward." "Indeed," Holmes replied, his voice low. "Aconite administered with care." The victim likely felt a burning sensation, then paralysis, before death claimed him. A swift and silent method, Watson. "Our killer is no amateur." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "Carver was well liked, by all accounts, ran the docks like clockwork. No enemies we could find, though we're still asking around. Any thoughts, Holmes?" Holmes stood, his gaze sweeping the room. The office was Spartan, its walls lined with ledgers and schedules, a map of the docks pinned to one side. A single window overlooked the river, its glass streaked with grime. He moved to the desk, rifling through papers with a practiced hand, then paused at a ledger marked with shipping manifests. His fingers lingered on an entry dated 2 weeks prior, detailing a consignment of goods from the Far East, co-signed by Sir Edward Harrow. "A connection," Holmes said, his voice sharp with realization. Carver and Harrow were linked by trade. This shipment silks and spices, valuable cargo. Who else was involved? Lestrade. The inspector scratched his chin. "We're looking into it. Harrow's company handled the import, but Carver oversaw the unloading here. There's a third party, a broker named Langley, but he's out of town." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Find him. He may be in danger or complicit." Watson, who had been examining the body, straightened. "Holmes, look at this." He pointed to the victim's left wrist, where the sleeve had written up, revealing a small tattoo, a rose entwined with a serpent, its ink faded but distinct. This isn't common among dock workers, I'd wager. Holmes's lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. Well observed, Watson. A symbol, perhaps of allegiance, or a mark of doom. He turned to Lestrade. Have your men search for similar tattoos among the dockyard workers? Discreetly, Lestrade nodded, though his expression betrayed his skepticism. You think this is some kind of cult, Holmes? I think nothing yet, Holmes replied coolly. I observe, and what I observe suggests a pattern, a purpose. 2 men, both poisoned, both marked by a black rose, both tied to a single trade deal. The killer is sending a message, and we must decipher it before they strike again. The morning wore on, the fog thinning as the sun struggled to break through. Holmes and Watson spent hours at the scene, combing through every detail. Holmes examined the floor for footprints, finding only the scuffed marks of Carver's boots and those of the constables. He inspected the window, noting a faint scratch on the sill, as if a tool had been used to pry it open. The ledger yielded more clues, notations in Carver's hand, detailing irregularities in the shipment missing crates, altered manifests. Holmes pocketed a torn page, its edges stained with what appeared to be the same ink used to dye the rose dot. As they left the dockyard, the air grew colder, the river's murmur a constant backdrop. Watson glanced at Holmes, whose face was a mask of concentration. What now, Holmes? This feels bigger than a single murderer. It is, Holmes said, his voice distant. The rose, the tattoo, the note, they point to an organization. Watson, a group with resources, with motive. The question is, what do they want? And why these men? They returned to 221B Baker Street as dusk settled over London, the gas lamps casting long shadows. Mrs. Hudson greeted them with tea and a plate of biscuits, but Holmes waved her off, retreating to his armchair by the fire. He lit his pipe, the smoke curling upward as he stared into the flames. Watson, accustomed to his friend's moods, settled at the desk, penning notes on the case. 2 victims, Holmes said at last, breaking the silence. Both poisoned, both marked. Sir Edward, a merchant of influence, and Carver, a man of practical power on the docks. The link is trade, but the motive is obscure. The rose and serpent tattoo suggests a secret society, yet such groups are often relics of the past, not active threats. Watson looked up from his notebook. Could it be personal? A grudge against these men? Holmes shook his head. 2. Elaborate for a personal vendetta. The black rose, dyed with rare ink, is a deliberate symbol. The poison aconite requires knowledge and access. This is a calculated campaign, Watson, and we are only seeing its surface. The next day, Holmes plunged into research, dispatching telegrams to contacts across the city. He sent Watson to the docks to interview workers, seeking any whisper of the rose and serpent symbol. Watson returned with little, only vague rumors of a shadowy lot who met in secret, their purpose unknown. Meanwhile, Holmes visited a chemist in Soho, confirming that the aconite used was of a particularly pure strain, available only through specialized suppliers. He cross-referenced the shipping manifests, noting that the cargo linked to Harrow and Carver had passed through several hands, including a shadowy firm registered in Whitechapel. By evening, Holmes had a lead, a warehouse in Whitechapel, rumored to house illicit goods. He and Watson set out under cover of darkness, their cab rattling through the city's underbelly. The warehouse was a hulking structure, its windows boarded, its doors chained. Holmes picked a lock with ease, and they slipped inside, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The air was thick with dust, the floor littered with broken crates. Holmes's lantern revealed a hidden compartment in the wall, containing a small vial of aconite and a bundle of black roses, their petals dyed with the same ink. A ledger, similar to Carver's, listed names and dates. Some crossed out Harrow and Carver among them. Holmes's eyes gleamed as he read, his fingers tracing the entries, A hit list, he said softly. And we are running out of time. As they left the warehouse, a figure darted from the shadows, vanishing into the fog. Holmes gave chase, but the figure was swift, melting into the maze of alleys. Watson, panting, caught up. Who was that? An agent of the order, Holmes said, his voice grim. They know we're close. Back at 2 to 1B. Holmes spread the ledger on the table, its pages a cipher of names and codes. He worked through the night, his pipe long forgotten, as he decoded fragments of the text. By dawn, he had a name, Lord Clarence, a government official tied to the same trade treaty as Harrow and Carver. Another name on the list, another target. We must warn him, Watson said, his voice urgent. Holmes nodded, but his expression was troubled. We will, Watson. But I fear we are not merely hunting a killer. We are unearthing a conspiracy, one that reaches deeper than we know. The fog of London seemed to thicken with their discovery, as if the city itself were conspiring to hide the truth. Holmes and Watson prepared for the next move, knowing the Order of the Black Rose was watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. Chapter 3. The Order of the Black Rose. The British Museum loomed over Bloomsbury like a sentinel of history, its grand columns bathed in the pale light of a late autumn afternoon. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson stepped out of their hansom cab, the clatter of hooves fading into the hum of London's bustling streets. A chill wind tugged at Watson's coat as he glanced at Holmes, whose sharp eyes were already scanning the museum's facade, as if the stone itself might whisper secrets. The Black Rose murders had gripped their attention, and the trail led here, to the labyrinthine archives where answers might lie buried in dust and ink. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper and polished wood. The vast reading room, with its domed ceiling and radiating desks, buzzed with scholars bent over manuscripts. Holmes, his lean frame moving with purpose, led Watson past rows of bookshelves to the archive section, where a clerk, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, greeted them with a nervous nod. Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, the clerk, Mr. Pennington, said, his voice barely above a whisper. Inspector Lestrade sent word you'd be coming. Something about a symbol. Holmes's eyes gleamed. A rose entwined with a serpent. I need access to your oldest records, medieval societies, secret orders, anything that might bear such a mark. Pennington hesitated, his fingers twitching, over a ledger. That's quite specific. The archives are vast, sir. It could take days. Then we begin now, Holmes replied, his tone brooking no delay. Time is a luxury we do not have. Watson, ever the practical companion, offered, a reassuring smile. We'll be thorough, but swift. Mr. Pennington lives, depend on it. Reluctantly, Pennington led them to a dimly lit chamber beneath the main reading room, where shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes and crumbling manuscripts. The air was colder here, the silence heavier, broken only by the faint rustle of pages as Pennington pulled out a catalogue. I'll fetch what I can, he muttered, disappearing into the maze of shelves. Holmes wasted no time. He moved like a bloodhound, his long fingers trailing over spines as he scanned titles, in Latin, French, and Old English. Watson, less adept at such research, followed, occasionally pulling a volume at Holmes's direction. What exactly are we looking for? Watson asked, hefting a dusty book on heraldry. A connection, Holmes murmured, his eyes fixed on a manuscript. The Black Rose and Serpent are no mere decoration. They're a signature, Watsuna, mark of intent. The dye on the rose, the aconite poison, the cryptic note, all point to a group with purpose and history. Watson frowned, setting the book down. A secret society, then, like the Freemasons. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Nothing so pedestrian. The Freemasons are a gentleman's club by comparison. This is something older, darker. The note, The order blooms, suggests a revival, a dormant force reawakened. As they worked, Pennington returned with a stack of books and scrolls, his hands trembling slightly. These mention rose symbols or secret orders, he said. But I must warn you, some of these texts, they're obscure, forbidden, even, in certain circles. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Forbidden. That's precisely what interests me. For hours, they pored over the texts. Watson struggled with the dense prose and faded script. But Holmes's mind was a machine, parsing details with relentless precision. He paused over a 17th-century chronicle detailing a shadowy group known as the Order of the Black Rose, formed during the English Civil War to protect royalist secrets. The chronicle described their emblem, a black rose entwined with a serpent, symbolizing loyalty and vengeance. The order, it seemed, had vanished after the Restoration. Its members, scattered or executed, vanished, but not extinct, Holmes said, tapping the page. This is no coincidence, Watson. The symbol, the note, they're calling cards of a resurrected order. Watson leaned over, squinting at the faded text. But why now? After 2 centuries? Holmes's eyes narrowed. That's the question. Something or someone has stirred the ashes. The victims, Sir Edward Harrow and the dockyard overseer, were linked by trade. The order's targets may be tied to a specific grievance, perhaps economic or political. As they delved deeper, Pennington grew increasingly agitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting a specter to emerge from the shadows. Watson noticed the man's unease and exchanged a look with Holmes, who subtly nodded. Pennington was hiding something. Mr. Pennington, Holmes said smoothly, closing a book with a deliberate thud. You've been most helpful, but I sense you know more than you've shared. The rose and serpents, have you seen it elsewhere? Pennington's face paled. I don't know what you mean, sir. Holmes stepped closer, his voice low and commanding. You're a scholar of obscure history, yet you tremble at the mention of this symbol. Speak plainly, or I'll deduce your secret myself, and I assure you, I will. Pennington's shoulders slumped. He glanced around, ensuring they were alone, then reached into a drawer and produced a small, leather-bound book, its cover embossed with a faint rose-and serpent design. I found this last year, hidden in a collection from a private estate, he whispered. I didn't think it was real, just a curiosity. But after you mentioned the murders, Holmes took the book, his fingers tracing the embossed symbol. He opened it to find pages filled with dense, coded script, interspersed with drawings of black roses and cryptic phrases. One page stood out, a schedule for a meeting in Whitechapel, 3 days hence, at midnight. The location was coded, but Holmes's mind was already at work. A cipher, he said, his voice tinged with excitement. Simple substitution, based on a Latin key. Give me a moment. Watson watched, fascinated, as Holmes scribbled on a scrap of paper, decoding the message with astonishing speed. Within minutes, he had it. The order gathers at the Raven's Claw, Whitechapel, under the moon's veil. The Raven's Claw, Watson said. A tavern. Likely, Holmes replied, slipping the book into his coat. Pennington, you'll speak of this to no one. Your life may depend on it. Pennington nodded, his face ashen. I swear, Mr. Holmes, I want no part of this. As they left the archives, Watson's mind raced. A secret society, a coded meeting. This is bigger than we thought, Holmes. What's their end game? Holmes's expression was grim. Power, Watson, or revenge. The Order of the Black Rose didn't vanish because it failed. It was betrayed. Someone has revived it to settle old scores, and London is their battlefield. The streets of Bloomsbury were shrouded in fog as they stepped outside, the museum's silhouette fading behind them. Holmes's mind was already elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle. The Black Rose, the aconite, the coded book haul threads in a tapestry of conspiracy. Watson, sensing the weight of the case, felt a familiar mix of dread and exhilaration. With Holmes leading the way, they were plunging into a shadow war, and the next move would take them to the heart of Whitechapel's underworld. The journey to Whitechapel would require preparation, and Holmes was not one to rush blindly into danger. Back at 221B, Baker Street, the fire crackled as Holmes spread the coated books pages across his desk, his magnifying glass hovering over the cryptic text. Watson, seated with a brandy, watched his friend work, marveling at the intensity of Holmes's focus. "The cipher is elegant," Holmes said, almost to himself. "It uses a modified Vigenère square, with Rosa Nigra as the key. Child's play for anyone with a classical education, but effective enough to deter casual readers." Watson leaned forward. "What else does it say? Anything about the murders?" Holmes turned a page, revealing a list of names, some crossed out. "Not directly, but this list. It's a roll of members, or perhaps targets. Sir Edward Harrow's name is here, as is the dockyard overseer's. Both are marked with a black rose symbol." Watson's stomach tightened. So they were chosen deliberately. But why? Holmes's eyes flicked to the fireplace, where a single black rose taken from the first crime scene lay preserved in a glass case. "The rose is the key. Its dye, as I confirmed with my chemical tests, is derived from a rare ink used in 18th century manuscripts. The order is invoking its past, but the motive remains elusive. The note, 'The order blooms,' suggests a renewal, a public declaration. They want to be seen." Watson set his glass down. "A revival then, but who's leading it? And why target men like Harrow?" Holmes's fingers drummed on the desk. Harrow was a merchant with ties to the East India Company. The overseer handled shipping contracts for the same. Their deaths disrupt trade routes, which suggests a motive rooted in commerce or its sabotage. The order may be striking at those who profited from its downfall. The clock struck 10, and Holmes stood abruptly. "We have 3 days until the Whitechapel meeting. I'll need to consult my contacts in the underworld, men who know the Raven's Claw. You, Watson, will research the victim's business dealings. Look for any connection to a treaty or scandal from 30 years ago." Watson nodded, though he felt the weight of the task. "And if the order is as dangerous as you suspect," Holmes's smile was cold, "then we'll need disguises, cunning, and perhaps a revolver or two. The game, Watson, is afoot." The next 2 days were a whirlwind of activity. Watson scoured newspapers and public records, uncovering a web of trade agreements linking Sir Edward Harrow and the dockyard overseer to a controversial treaty from 1860, which had enriched certain merchants while bankrupting others. The treaty, tied to opium exports, had sparked protests and whispers of corruption. Could the order's grudge stem from that era? Meanwhile, Holmes vanished into London's underbelly, returning with a map of Whitechapel's taverns and a grim expression. "The Raven's Claw is a den of thieves," he said, spreading the map across the table. "It's frequented by smugglers, informants, and worse. The order's choice of meeting place suggests they're not afraid to mingle with the city's dregs." Watson glanced at the map, noting the tavern's location in a warren of alleys. "How do we infiltrate without being spotted?" Holmes's eyes glinted with mischief. "We become the dregs, Watson, dockworkers, down on their luck, seeking a pint and a fight. Mrs. Hudson will help with the costumes." By the eve of the meeting, they were ready. Holmes, transformed by grease paint and tattered clothes, looked every inch a weathered laborer. Watson, less comfortable in his own disguise, adjusted a threadbare cap and checked his revolver, hidden beneath his coat. The fog was thick as they boarded a cab for Whitechapel, the city's pulse growing darker with every mile. The Raven's Claw was a squat, grimy tavern, its sign barely legible in the flickering gaslight. The air inside reeked of stale ale and unwashed bodies. Holmes and Watson slipped in, blending with the crowd of rough men and sharper-eyed rogues. They took a corner table, nursing pints as Holmes's gaze swept the room. "There," he whispered, nodding toward a shadowed alcove where 3 men huddled, their voices low. One wore a ring with a faint rose design, barely visible in the dim light. Watson's pulse quickened as Holmes leaned closer, straining to hear. "The reckoning is near," one man said, his voice hoarse. "The thorn says the next bloom will shake the empire." Watson's eyes widened. "The thorn," he mouthed. Holmes nodded, his expression unreadable. Before they could eavesdrop further, a burly man at the bar shouted, pointing at Holmes, "Oi, you're no docker. I know that face, Sherlock Holmes." The room erupted, tables overturned, glasses shattered, and the 3 men in the alcove bolted for a back door. Holmes sprang up, Watson at his heels, as they shoved through the chaos. A knife flashed in the dim light, grazing Holmes's sleeve, but he didn't falter. They burst into an alley, the fog swallowing the fleeing figures. "After them," Holmes shouted, sprinting into the mist. Watson followed, his heart pounding, as they chased shadows through Whitechapel's twisting lanes. The pursuit ended. At a locked gate, the men vanished. But Holmes spotted something on the ground, a leather-bound ledger, dropped in the haste, back at 2-1B. Holmes opened the ledger, revealing pages of coded names and dates. "Targets," he said grimly. "And look, Lord Clarence, a government official, is next." Watson stared at the page, the weight of the conspiracy settling over him. "Holmes, this is bigger than we thought. The order isn't just killing, they're planning something catastrophic." Holmes's eyes burned with determination. "Then, we move faster, Watson. The game grows darker, and we must be ready for the next bloom." The ledger's secrets would lead them to a gala, a poisoned glass, and a woman in black. But for now, the Order of the Black Rose held the advantage. Its thorns hidden in London's shadows. Chapter 4. Into the underworld. The fog hung low over Whitechapel, a shroud of gray that clung to the cobblestones and muffled the distant clatter of horse hooves. Sherlock Holmes, clad in a threadbare jacket and a flat cap pulled low over his brow, moved with the purposeful slouch of a dockworker. Beside him, Dr. John Watson mirrored his disguise. His broad shoulders hunched beneath a tattered coat, a scarf wound loosely around his neck to obscure his face. The air was thick with the stench of coal smoke, stale beer, and the faint temps carried on the damp breeze. It was the kind of night that made men clutch their coats tighter and hurry home. But Holmes and Watson were heading deeper into the underbelly of London. Drawn by the cryptic message Holmes had deciphered in the British Museum's archives. The message, hidden within the pages of a dusty tome on 18th-century secret societies, had been a cipher of elegant simplicity, child's play for Holmes, but a clear sign of intent. It spoke of a gathering in Whitechapel, in a tavern called the Black and Anchor, at the stroke of midnight, in 3 days' time. That night had arrived, and the 2 men wove through the labyrinthine alleys, their boots splashing in puddles that reflected the dim glow of gas lamps. The streets were alive with the low hum of vice. Raucous laughter spilled from gin shops. Shadowed figures bartered in doorways, and the occasional cry of a street hawker pierced the fog. Holmes's eyes, sharp beneath the brim of his cap, scanned every detail: the flicker of a curtain in a grimy window, the scuff of a boot on the pavement, the way a man lingered too long at a corner. "Stay alert, Watson," he murmured, his voice low and clipped. "The Order of the Black Rose does not gather in such a place for idle chatter. We are walking into a den of wolves." Watson nodded, his hand brushing the reassuring weight of the revolver tucked beneath his coat. He was no stranger to danger, having faced it in the dusty passes of Afghanistan, but there was something unsettling about this case. The black roses, the cryptic notes, the whisper of a secret society, it all felt like a puzzle, with pieces that refused to fit. "Do you think they'll recognize us?" he asked, keeping his voice as low as Holmes's. "Not if we play our parts," Holmes replied, adjusting his cap to cast a deeper shadow over his angular face. The key is in the details, Watson. A dockworker does not stride with purpose. He shuffles, weary from a day's labor. His eyes are downcast, his shoulders slumped. Observe the men around O's mimic, their gait, their weariness. We are not Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson tonight. We are Tom and Jack, two weary souls seeking a pint and a moment's respite. Watson grunted, adjusting his posture to match the slouch of a man beaten down by life. He marveled, not for the first time, at Holmes's ability to vanish into a role. The detective's face, so distinctive in its sharp lines and piercing gaze, seemed to soften into anonymity, his usual intensity buried beneath the guise of a laborer. Watson followed suit, though he felt the weight of eyes on them as they approached the blackened anchor. The tavern was a squat, grimy building wedged between a pawnshop and a crumbling tenement. Its sign, a faded anchor wreathed in black paint, creaked in the wind. The windows glowed with the sickly yellow light of oil lamps, and the door hung slightly ajar, spilling the sounds of coarse laughter and the clink of glasses onto the street. Holmes pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour reek of spilled ale. The room was crowded, a sea of rough-faced dockworkers, sailors, and ne'er-do-wells hunched over tables littered with tankards and cards. A barmaid with a tired smile wove through the throng, balancing a tray of drinks. At the far end of the room, a fiddler scraped a mournful tune, barely audible over the din. Holmes scanned the room, his eyes flicking from face to face, searching for any sign of the order. "There," he whispered, nodding toward a shadowed corner where a heavy curtain hung across a doorway. Two men stood nearby, their postures too rigid, their eyes too watchful to be mere patrons. "That's our entrance. Follow my lead." Holmes shuffled forward, weaving through the crowd with the practiced ease of a man who belonged. Watson followed, keeping his head down, his hand close to his revolver. They reached the bar, where Holmes leaned against the counter, tossing a coin to the barman. "2 pints," he said, his voice roughened to match the dockworker's accent, "and a word about the back room." The barman, a burly man with a scarred cheek, eyed them warily. "Back room's private," he growled, sliding to foaming tankards across the counter. "No business of yours." Holmes slipped another coin across the bar, his fingers brushing the man's hand in a way that suggested more could follow. "Heard there's a game back there," he said, his tone casual, but laced with intent. "Me and Jack here, we're good for a wager. Who's running it?" The barman hesitated, his eyes narrowing. For a moment, Watson thought he might refuse, but the glint of silver won out. "Ask for Thorne," he muttered, jerking his head toward the curtained doorway. "But don't expect a warm welcome." Holmes gave a curt nod, pocketing his change and picking up the tankards. He handed one to Watson, who took it with a grunt, playing his part. They made their way toward the curtain, the 2 sentries watching them approach. One, a wiry man with a scar across his lip, stepped forward. "What's your business?" he demanded. "Thorne sent for us," Holmes said, his voice steady. "Said there's a game tonight. We're here to play." The sentry's eyes flicked to his companion, a hulking figure with a broken nose. A silent exchange passed between them, and the wiry man nodded. "Names?" "Tom," Holmes said, jerking a thumb at himself. "This here's Jack." The hulking man grunted, pulling back the curtain to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Down there. Don't cause trouble." Holmes and Watson descended, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The staircase opened into a low-ceilinged cellar, lit by flickering candles that cast long shadows across the stone walls. A dozen men sat around a heavy oak table, their faces half hidden in the gloom. At the head of the table stood a figure cloaked in black, his face obscured by a hood. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. Holmes and Watson took seats at the edge of the group, their tankards untouched. The cloaked figure spoke, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of authority. "The order blooms," he began, and Watson felt a chill at the familiar phrase from the murder scenes. "Tonight, we prepare for the reckoning. The betrayers will fall, and the Black Rose will rise." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, though Watson noted a few uneasy glances among the men. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the speaker. The man's hands, visible beneath the cloak, were long and pale, adorned with a single ring or rose, entwined with a serpent, identical to the tattoo on the dockyard overseer's wrist. The speaker, presumably Thorne, continued, his words cryptic but laced with menace. He spoke of cleansing the city, of avenging the forgotten, and of a plan that would shake the pillars of the empire. Watson strained to catch every word, his heart pounding. Holmes, meanwhile, was scanning the room, his gaze lingering on a leather-bound ledger resting on a side table, its pages marked with a ribbon. As Thorne's speech grew more fervent, Holmes leaned toward Watson, his whisper barely audible. "The ledger, Watson, it's our key. Keep your eyes on the room." Watson nodded, his hand inching toward his revolver. He scanned the faces of the men, noting their expressions, some fervent, others uneasy, as if they were not entirely committed to the cause. One man, younger than the rest, kept glancing at the door, his fingers twitching nervously. Thorne's speech reached a crescendo, and he raised a goblet, its contents dark and viscous. "To the reckoning," he declared, and the men echoed the toast, though the young man hesitated before drinking. Holmes's eyes narrowed, catching the hesitation. Suddenly, a shout broke the tension. "You!" The wiry sentry from upstairs stood in the doorway, pointing at Holmes. "You're no dock worker. I know that face." The room erupted into chaos. Men leaped to their feet, drawing knives and cudgels. Holmes was on his feet in an instant, seizing the ledger and shoving it inside his coat. "Watson, now," he barked. Watson drew his revolver, firing a warning shot into the ceiling. The crack of gunfire froze the room for a split second, long enough for Holmes to grab a candle and hurl it at a stack of crates, igniting a pile of straw. Smoke billowed, and the men coughed and stumbled, their shouts mingling with the crackle of flames. Holmes and Watson bolted for the stairs, the ledger clutched tightly. The sentries gave chase, their footsteps pounding behind. Watson fired another shot, this one grazing the hulking man's shoulder, slowing him. They burst into the tavern, shoving through the startled crowd and out into the foggy street. The chase spilled into the alleys, Holmes leading the way with the instincts of a bloodhound. He darted down side streets, leaped over crates, and ducked beneath low-hanging signs, Watson struggling to keep pace. The shouts of their pursuers grew fainter, swallowed by the fog. But Holmes did not slow until they reached a deserted courtyard, its cobblestones slick with dew, panting. Watson leaned against a wall, his revolver still in hand. "That was too close, Holmes," he said, his voice hoarse. "Did you get what we came for?" Holmes pulled the ledger from his coat, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Indeed, Watson. This is the heart of the Order's secrets. Names, dates, plansits, all here, in code, of course, but nothing I cannot unravel." He flipped open the ledger, his fingers tracing the rows of cryptic symbols. Watson peered over his shoulder, catching glimpses of names Sir Edward Harrow, the dockyard overseer, and others unfamiliar, but marked with the same Roseanne serpent symbol. One name stood out, written in bold: Lord Clarence, Privy Council, Watson's. Blood ran cold. Clarence, the government official. Holmes nodded, his expression grim. "The Order's next target. We have little time, Watson. The reckoning is closer than we thought." They slipped back into the fog, the ledger a heavy weight in Holmes's coat. The night had yielded its first secret, but the shadow of the Black Rose loomed larger than ever, its thorns poised to strike at the heart of London, the journey back. 2221B. Baker Street was a tense one, the fog their only ally as they navigated the maze of Whitechapel's alleys. Holmes's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of the night's discoveries. The ledger, he knew, was a map to the Order's intentions, but its code would take time to crack, time they might not have. Watson, meanwhile, felt the weight of the revolver in his pocket, a reminder of how close they had come to disaster. The Order of the Black Rose was no mere band of criminals. It was a machine of vengeance, driven by a purpose Holmes had yet to fully unravel. As they reached the familiar door of 221B, Holmes paused, his hand on the knob. "Watson," he said, his voice low, "tonight we glimpsed the beast. Tomorrow we hunt it." Watson nodded, his resolve hardening. "And we'll bring it down, Holmes, together." Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the cluttered room. Holmes spread the ledger on the table, his fingers already tracing the coded lines. The game was afoot, and the stakes had never been higher. Chapter 5. The third strike. The air in London was thick with anticipation, as if the city itself held its breath. The grand townhouse of Lord Clarence, a towering figure in the government, and a key player in the trade treaty that Holmes suspected, lay at the heart of the Black Rose murders, stood resplendent under the glow of gaslights. Its white stone facade gleamed, and the windows sparkled with the reflections of chandeliers within. Tonight, it hosted a gala, a glittering affair attended by the elite of London society, politicians, merchants, and aristocrats mingling in a swirl of silk and cigar smoke. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, a sinister current pulsed, one that Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson were determined to uncover. Holmes, dressed impeccably in a tailored black suit, blended seamlessly with the crowd. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noting every detail: the clink of crystal glasses, the overly loud laughter of a nervous diplomat, the subtle exchange of glances between two men near the buffet. Watson, less comfortable in his formal attire, adjusted his tie for the third time, his gaze darting between Holmes and the throng of guests. "Relax, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice low as he accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, though he had no intention of drinking it. "Your fidgeting will draw more attention than my deductions." Watson gave a wry smile. "I'd feel better with my revolver than this blasted tie." "Something's off, Holmes. I can feel it." "Your instincts are not entirely unfounded," Holmes replied, his gaze locking onto a woman in a deep emerald gown who lingered near the grand staircase. "But let us not tip our hand too soon. The Order of the Black Rose is here, I am certain. The ledger we took from Whitechapel listed Lord Clarence as a target, and tonight's gala is the perfect stage for their next move." The ledger, stolen during their perilous infiltration of the Order's meeting in Whitechapel, had been a treasure trove of coded names, cryptic references to a reckoning, and, most crucially, a list of targets that included Sir Edward Harrow, the dockyard overseer, and now Lord Clarence. Holmes had spent the previous night deciphering its contents, his pipe smoke curling around him like a shroud as he worked. The pattern was clear. The victims were all linked to a trade treaty that promised to reshape Britain's economic influence in Europe, a treaty that had evidently stirred the ire of the Order. But why? That question gnawed at Holmes, and he knew the answer lay in the events of this evening. The gala was in full swing, the ballroom alive with the strains of a waltz. Lord Clarence, a portly man with a florid face and a penchant for self-important speeches, stood at the center of a cluster of admirers. His voice boomed over the music as he recounted a recent triumph in Parliament, oblivious to the danger that Holmes suspected lurked nearby. Watson, ever the soldier, positioned himself near a marble pillar, his eyes scanning for any sign of trouble, a glint of a weapon. A too-quick movement, anything that might betray the Order's presence. Holmes, meanwhile, moved through the crowd, like a shadow, his mind cataloging every face, every gesture. He noted the servants, their trays laden with canapes and wine, their expressions a mix of boredom and practiced deference. One, a young man with a sharp jaw and eyes that lingered too long on Lord Clarence, caught Holmes's attention. The detective drifted closer, pretending to admire a painting on the wall, a garish depiction of a hunt, all reds and golds, while observing the servant from the corner of his eye. "Watson," Holmes said softly, sidling up to his friend without breaking his gaze. "The servant in the black waistcoat, third from the left. He's not carrying a tray like the others. Watch him." Watson nodded, his hand instinctively brushing the pocket where his revolver would have been, had propriety not forbidden it. "What's he doing?" "Nothing yet," Holmes replied. "But his posture is wrong. Too tense, too alert. He's not here to serve wine." Before Watson could respond, a ripple passed through the crowd. Lord Clarence had raised his glass, proposing a toast to the prosperity of the Empire. The room fell silent, save for the soft clink of glasses and the murmur of agreement. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he watched the servant edge closer to the Lord, his hand slipping into his pocket. "Watson now," Holmes hissed, moving swiftly through the crowd. But even as he closed the distance, a woman in a black velvet gown stepped into Lord Clarence's circle, her movements graceful, yet deliberate. She leaned in, whispering something in the Lord's ear, and handed him a fresh glass of wine. Holmes froze, his mind racing. The woman's face was partially obscured by a lace fan, but her poise and the calculated nature of her approach screamed danger. "Stop her," Holmes barked, pushing past a startled debutante. Watson lunged forward, but the crowd was thick, and the woman melted into it like smoke. Lord Clarence, oblivious, raised the new glass to his lips. Holmes reached him just as the Lord took a sip. "No," he shouted, knocking the glass from Clarence's hand. It shattered on the marble floor, red wine pooling like blood. The room gasped, and Clarence staggered, his face paling as he clutched his throat. "Poison," Holmes said grimly, catching the Lord as he collapsed. "Watson, help me." Watson was at his side in an instant, easing Clarence to the floor as the crowd erupted in chaos. Women screamed, men shouted for a doctor, and the orchestra faltered, their notes dissolving into discord. Holmes knelt beside Clarence, his fingers probing the man's pulse. It was weak, fluttering like a trapped bird. "Stay with me, man," Watson urged, loosening Clarence's collar. "What did you feel? Describe it." Clarence's eyes were wide, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Burning in my throat." A rose. His hand fumbled at his chest, where a single black rose had been pinned to his lapel, its petals stark against the white of his shirt. Holmes's gaze darted to the shattered glass. He scooped up a shard, sniffing it carefully. "Aconite, again," he muttered. But how was it administered so quickly? The wine alone wouldn't act this fast. He examined the rose, noting its unnatural hue dyed, like the others, with a rare ink that left a faint metallic scent. But something else caught his eye, a tiny glint of metal embedded in Clarence's finger, where he'd gripped the glass. Holmes plucked it free, a needle, no larger than a pin, coated with a faint residue. "A ring," Holmes said, his voice cold with realization. The woman in black. She wore a ring with a hidden needle, laced with aconite. She pricked him when she handed him the glass. Watson looked up, his face grim. "He's fading, Holmes. We need an antidote, now." "There is no antidote for aconite in these doses," Holmes said, his mind racing. "But we can slow the poison's spread. Watson, fetch ice quickly. And brandy. It may dilate the blood vessels enough to buy time." Watson sprang to his feet, barking orders at the stunned servants. Holmes turned his attention back to Clarence, whose eyes were glazing over. "Stay with me, Lord Clarence," he said, his voice low and commanding. "Who was the woman? Did you know her?" Lips moved, but no sound came. His hand twitched, pointing weakly at the rose. Then, with a final shudder, he went still. Holmes checked his pulse, his expression darkening. He's gone. The room was a maelstrom of panic now, guests pushing toward the exits as Lestrade and his constables burst in, their heavy boots echoing on the marble. Lestrade's face was a mask of frustration and fear as he took in the scene. Holmes, what the devil happened? Another Black Rose murder, Holmes said, rising to his feet. Lord Clarence was poisoned, likely by a woman in a black gown. She used a ring with a concealed needle, coated in aconite. The rose was left as a calling card, just as before. Lestrade swore under his breath. This is getting out of hand, Holmes. The public's in a panic. The papers are calling it the Black Rose Terror. If we don't stop this soon, we will, Holmes interrupted, his tone sharp. But I need your men to secure the exits. The woman cannot have gone far. And find that servant, the one in the black waistcoat. He was watching Clarence too closely. Lestrade nodded, barking orders to his men. Watson returned, his face flushed from running. No ice in the kitchens, but I've got brandy, he said, holding up a bottle. Too late, I take it. Holmes nodded curtly. The poison was too fast. But we have a new lead. The woman in black, she's our key. And the needle suggests a level of sophistication beyond a common assassin. The constables began herding guests into groups, checking for anyone matching the description of the woman in black. Holmes and Watson moved through the chaos, questioning servants and guests alike. Most were too shaken to offer anything useful, their accounts muddled by fear and champagne. But one servant, a young maid with trembling hands, caught Holmes's attention. You there? He said, his voice gentle but firm. You were near Lord Clarence when he fell. Did you see the woman who gave him the wine? The maid nodded, her eyes wide. She was beautiful, sir. Tall, with dark hair pinned up high. She wore a black gown, all velvet, and a lace fan. She smiled at his lordship, but it wasn't a kind smile, more like a snake's. Did you see where she went? Watson asked. She slipped out through the terrace doors. Sir, the maid said, pointing to a set of glass doors leading to the gardens, right after his lordship fell. Holmes was already moving, Watson at his heels. The terrace was dark, the air heavy with the scent of roses and damp earth. The gardens stretched out before the townhouse, a maze of hedges and fountains illuminated only by the faint glow of lanterns. Holmes scanned the shadows, his senses razor-sharp. There, he whispered, pointing to a flicker of movement near a stone fountain. A figure in black darted between the hedges, her gown catching the moonlight. Holmes broke into a run, Watson close behind, their footsteps muffled by the grass. The woman was fast, her movements fluid as she wove through the garden. Holmes, however, was relentless, his long strides eating up the distance. He vaulted over a low hedge, landing lightly and gaining ground. The woman glanced back, her face still obscured, and tossed something to the ground, a small object that glinted in the moonlight. Holmes skidded to a stop, kneeling to retrieve it. It was a ring, its band simple but for a tiny compartment that, when pressed, revealed a needle coated with a sticky residue. Clever, he muttered, pocketing it, but not clever enough. The chase continued, the woman leading them deeper into the garden. She was heading for a side gate, where a carriage waited, its driver cloaked in shadow. Holmes pushed harder, his breath steady, despite the exertion. Watson, panting, drew level with him. She's getting away. Watson gasped. Not yet, Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. He spotted a low wall ahead, a perfect ambush point. With a burst of speed, he cut through a gap in the hedges, positioning himself to intercept her. The woman, unaware, rounded the corner and nearly collided with him. Enough, Holmes barked, grabbing her wrist. She twisted, surprisingly strong, and swung her fan at his face. Holmes dodged, but the distraction allowed her to break free, sprinting for the gate. Watson tackled her just as she reached it, pinning her to the ground. Stay down, Watson growled, his military training evident in his grip. The woman struggled, but Watson held firm, securing her arms. Holmes approached, his expression unreadable. He knelt beside her, lifting her chin to study her face. She was indeed beautiful, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that burned with defiance. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And why are you killing for the Order of the Black Rose?" She laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You think you've caught me, Mr. Holmes. You've caught nothing but a shadow. The Order blooms, and you cannot stop it." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. Watson, search her." Watson patted her down, finding a small vial of liquid, likely more poison, and a folded note. Holmes unfolded it, his brow furrowing as he read the words. "The reckoning nears. The thorn will rise." The note bore the same rose-end serpent symbol they'd found on the dockyard overseer. Before Holmes could question her further, a shout came from the direction of the townhouse. Lestrade and his men were approaching, their lanterns bobbing in the darkness. The woman seized the moment, twisting out of Watson's grip with a sudden, desperate strength. She bolted for the carriage, but Holmes was faster, grabbing her arm and wrenching it behind her back. "Not this time," he said coldly. "Lestrade, over here." The inspector and his constables swarmed the garden, surrounding the woman. She glared at Holmes, her defiance unbroken, even as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You're too late," she spat. "The thorn will finish what we started." Holmes ignored her, turning to Lestrade. "Take her to Scotland Yard. Keep her under guard, and don't let her speak to anyone until I arrive." "She's more than she seems." Lestrade nodded, his face grim. "What about the servant? The one you mentioned?" Holmes's eyes darkened. "He's likely fled, but he's not our primary concern now. This woman is the key to the Order's plans, Watson. Let's return to the townhouse. There's more to find." Back inside, the gala had dissolved into chaos. Guests huddled in groups as constables questioned them. Holmes moved to the spot where Clarence had fallen, examining the broken glass and the black rose. He picked up the rose, turning it over in his hands. "The ink," he murmured. "It's the same as the others, but there's something else. A residue, almost like wax." He scraped a sample into a small envelope, tucking it into his pocket. Watson watched, his face etched with worry. "Holmes, this is bigger than we thought. The public's terrified, and if the Order can strike at a gala like this, no one's safe." "Precisely," Holmes said, his voice low. "Which is why we must act swiftly. The woman in black, she's not the mastermind, but she's close to it. The note mentioned the thorn, just as the ledger did. We're getting closer, Watson, but we're also running out of time." They spent the next hour combing the townhouse for clues, questioning servants and guests. The maid's description of the woman in black was corroborated by others, but no one knew her identity. The servant, Holmes had noticed earlier, was nowhere to be found, confirming his suspicion that the man was an Order operative. As dawn broke over London, casting a gray light over the city, Holmes and Watson returned to 2-1B Baker Street, the weight of the case pressing heavily on them in the quiet of their rooms. Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him as he stared at the black rose he'd taken from Clarence's body. "The Order is targeting those linked to the trade treaty," he said, almost to himself. "But why? What grudge do they hold, and how does the thorn fit into it? There's a personal element here, Watson. I can feel it." "Watson, nursing a..." Brandy nodded. The woman's words, "The thorn will rise." It sounds almost vengeful, like this is more than politics or power. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. And that note, the ring, the rose, they're all pieces of a puzzle. We need to find the woman's connection to the Order, and we need to know who the thorn is before they strike again." He rose, pacing the room, his mind a whirlwind of deductions. The woman in black was their best lead yet, but her capture only deepened the mystery. Who was she, and how did she fit into the Order's plans? What was the reckoning, and why was the Thorn so intent on it? As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Holmes knew one thing for certain: the Black Rose would bloom again, and he had to stop it before it consumed London. The investigation continued, with Holmes and Watson preparing to interrogate the woman at Scotland Yard. But as they left 2-1B, a new question lingered in Holmes's mind. Why had the woman's eyes, in that brief moment of defiance, seemed so familiar? It was a clue he couldn't yet place, but one that would prove crucial in the days to come. Chapter 6. The Woman in Black. The fog clung to London's theatre district like a jealous lover, wrapping the cobbled streets in a shroud of grey that muffled the clatter of hooves and the distant cries of newsboys. Gaslights flickered, casting pools of amber light that barely pierced the haze. Sherlock Holmes moved through the mist with the precision of a predator, his long coat flapping like a raven's wings, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowed doorways and glittering marquees. Beside him, Dr. John Watson kept pace, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, though his brow furrowed with unease. The air smelled of damp stone, cheap perfume, and the faint temps of coal smoke. An olfactory map of the city's underbelly. Holmes had tracked the mysterious woman in black to this place, the heart of London's theatrical world, where illusion and reality blurred as easily as the fog obscured the stars. The clue or servant's testimony from Lord Clarence's gala had been maddeningly vague. A woman in a black gown, her face half hidden by a veil, seen slipping away moments after the nobleman collapsed, a black rose floating in his poisoned wine. Yet for Holmes' vagueness was merely a puzzle's invitation. He had cross-referenced the servant's description with whispers from his network of informants, the irregulars. Those ragtag boys who saw everything and learned of a figure, matching her silhouette, frequenting the Lyceum Theatre. Now, as midnight approached, the game was afoot. Holmes, Watson muttered, his breath visible in the chill air. Are you certain this woman is worth chasing? She could be a bystander, caught up in the moment. Holmes's lips twitched, not quite a smile. A bystander who vanishes into the night, leaving no trace, at the precise moment a man dies. No, Watson, she is a thread in this tapestry, and I intend to pull until the pattern reveals itself. They paused outside the Lyceum, its grand facade looming like a temple to drama. Posters plastered across its walls advertised the Lady of Lions, the ink curling in the damp air. The theater was dark, its performances long ended, but a faint light glowed from a side entrance, a beacon in the fog. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he gestured for Watson to follow, his movements silent as a cat's. The side door was unlocked. Careless oversight, or a deliberate lure, Holmes couldn't yet say. They slipped inside, entering a narrow corridor lined with faded velvet curtains and the ghosts of old grease paint. The air was thick with the scent of dust and wax, and the distant creak of floorboards suggested life within. Holmes's hand rested lightly on his pocket, where a small revolver lay hidden, though he preferred wit to weapons. Watson, ever the soldier, gripped his cane tighter, its concealed blade a comfort in the gloom. They moved deeper, guided by the flicker of a single gas lamp at the corridor's end. Voices drifted from a room beyond, low and urgent, like the hum of a disturbed hive. Holmes raised a hand, signaling Watson to halt. He pressed himself against the wall, ear tilted toward the sound, parsing the words. The order demands results, Eliza. You were seen, careless. The voice was male, sharp with authority, tinged with a foreign accent. Prussian. Perhaps. I did as instructed, came a woman's reply, her tone defiant yet strained. The rose was placed. Clarence is dead. What more do you want? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Eliza, a name to anchor the shadow. He glanced at Watson, who nodded, his face set with resolve. They edged closer, the door to the room slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of candlelight and movement. Holmes peered through the gap. The room was a cluttered backstage office, strewn with costumes and dog-eared scripts. A man in a dark suit stood, with his back to the door, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind him. Before him stood the woman in black tall, slender, her gown absorbing the light like a void. Her veil was gone, revealing a face that might have been beautiful once, now hardened by time and secrets. Her dark hair was pinned tightly, and her eyes, sharp as cut glass, darted toward the door. Holmes froze, but her gaze passed over him. Unseeing, you risk everything, the man snapped. The thorn will not tolerate failure. The reckoning is near, and every step must be perfect. The thorn, the woman, Eliza retorted, cares only for his vendetta. I've played my part. Sir Edward's secrets died with him, as ordered. Holmes's mind raced. Sir Edward Harrow, the first victim, linked to this woman and the Order of the Black Rose. Her words confirmed a connection, but the nature of those secrets remained elusive. He needed more. He signaled Watson to stay put and slipped closer, risking exposure for clarity. The man turned. His face briefly illuminated a hooked nose, a scar across his cheek, eyes like cold steel. You know too much, Eliza. That locket, you were dangerous sentimentality. If the thorn learns of it, Eliza's hand flew to her throat, where a silver locket gleamed against her black gown. Leave it be, Dietrich. It's nothing. Holmes's heart quickened. A locket, a tangible clue, small but potent. He memorized its shape oval, engraved with a faint rose pattern. If he could get his hands on it, it might unlock the woman's role in this deadly game. The conversation shifted, the man Dietrich lowering his voice to a whisper. Holmes strained to hear, catching fragments. The manor in Surrey, the artifact, the Prime Minister's speech. The words were a map to the Order's endgame, but incomplete. He needed that locket, and he needed Eliza to talk. A floorboard creaked under Holmes's weight. The room fell silent. Dietrich's head snapped toward the door, and Eliza's eyes widened. Someone's here, she hissed. Holmes cursed inwardly. He shoved the door open, deciding boldness was his only play. Good evening, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. I believe we have matters to discuss. Dietrich drew a knife, its blade glinting in the candlelight. Eliza stepped back, her hand still clutching the locket. Watson burst in behind Holmes, cane raised, ready for a fight. The air crackled with tension, a standoff in the heart of the theater. Who are you? Dietrich growled, his accent thicker. Now, his stance predatory. Sherlock Holmes, came the reply, delivered with a faint smirk. And this is Dr. Watson. We're here about the Black Roses and the murders they mark. Eliza's face paled, but she held her ground, her eyes flicking between Holmes and Dietrich. You're meddling in things you don't understand, she said, her voice low, almost pleading. Leave now, or you'll regret it. I rarely regret knowledge, Holmes said, stepping closer, his gaze locked on her locket. That trinket, for instance. It's more than sentiment, isn't it? A key, perhaps, to the Order's plans. Dietrich lunged, his knife slashing toward Holmes's chest. Holmes sidestepped with liquid grace, seizing the man's wrist and twisting until the blade clattered to the floor. Watson moved to restrain Dietrich, but Eliza was faster. She darted for a side door, her gown a blur of black silk. Watson, hold him, Holmes shouted, already in pursuit. He chased Eliza through a maze of backstage corridors, her footsteps echoing like a metronome. Props and costumes littered the path, feathered hats, wooden swords, a cracked mirror reflecting his own determined face. She was quick, but Holmes was relentless, his long legs closing the distance. She burst into an alley behind the theater, the fog swallowing her form. Holmes followed, his senses sharp, tracking the faint rustle of her dress. The alley was a dead end, blocked by a high brick wall. Eliza spun to face him, her back against the stone, her chest heaving. Stay back, she warned. her hand fumbling for something in her sleeve, a weapon, perhaps. But Holmes saw the fear in her eyes, the crack in her defiance. "Eliza Vane," he said, his voice steady. "Former actress, once celebrated, now entangled with the Order of the Black Rose. Why? What hold do they have over you?" Her lips parted, surprised he knew her name. "You've done your homework, Mr. Holmes. But you're wrong if you think I'll betray them." "Then tell me about Sir Edward," he pressed, stepping closer. "What secrets did he carry that warranted a black rose and a dose of aconite?" Her hand tightened on the locket, her knuckles white. "He betrayed the order. Long ago. They all did. Harrow, the overseer, Clarence. They thought they could walk away, but the past never forgets." "And you?" Holmes asked, his voice softening, probing for weakness. "Are you their executioner, or just another pawn?" Her eyes flashed with anger, but something else flickered their guilt. "Perhaps. I had no choice," she whispered. "The thorn. He knows things, about me, about my past. I do what he asks, or I lose everything." Holmes saw his opening. "Help me stop him, Eliza. Tell me who he is, where he hides." She laughed, a bitter sound. "You think it's that simple? The thorn is a shadow, even to us. I've never seen his face, but he's close, always watching, and he'll kill me if I talk." A shout echoed from the theater. Watson, calling for Holmes. Dietrich must have broken free. Eliza seized the distraction, shoving past Holmes, and sprinting toward the alley's mouth. He lunged, grabbing her wrist, but she twisted free, the locket tearing from her neck and falling to the wet cobbles. "Eliza," Holmes called, but she vanished into the fog, her footsteps fading. He knelt, retrieving the locket, its silver, warm from her skin. He opened it, revealing a miniature portrait of a man, sharp features, piercing eyes, a face eerily familiar, a younger version of someone he knew, but who? The answer danced just beyond his grasp. Watson emerged, panting, his face flushed. "Dietrich got away," he said, frustration in his voice. "Knocked me down and ran. Are you all right?" Holmes held up the locket, his mind already dissecting its significance. "Better than all right, Watson. We have a piece of the puzzle." They returned to 221B Baker Street as dawn broke, the fog lifting to reveal a city unaware of the danger blooming in its shadows. Holmes sat by the fire, the locket in his hand, turning it over like a talisman. Watson poured brandy, his hands still trembling from the night's exertion. "Who is she, Holmes?" he asked, settling into his chair. "And that locket, what does it mean?" "Eliza Vane," Holmes said, his voice distant, "is a woman, caught in a web not entirely of her making, an actress turned assassin, or perhaps a reluctant tool of the order. As for the locket," he opened it again, studying the portrait. The man's features, high cheekbones, a strong jaw stirred a memory, but it refused to surface. "This is no ordinary keepsake. It's a link to someone important, someone tied to the order's heart." Watson leaned forward, his brow creased. "You think it's the thorn?" "Possibly," Holmes said, closing the locket with a snap. "Or someone close to him." Eliza's fear was genuine, but so was her hesitation. "She's no fanatics, she's driven by necessity. If we can find her again, we can turn her." "And the portrait?" Watson pressed. Holmes's eyes darkened. "It resembles someone I've seen before, though I cannot yet place him. A family resemblance, perhaps, to someone in power. We need more data, Watson. Tomorrow, we dig into Eliza's past, her roles, her patrons, her fall from grace, and we cross-reference this face with every notable figure in London." The fire crackled, casting shadows across the room. Holmes leaned back, his mind a whirl of connections: black roses, poison, a secret society, and now a locket that felt like a key to a locked door. The Order's plan was unfolding, and the thorn was out there orchestrating chaos. But Holmes was closing in, and he would not rest until the deadly secret of the Black Rose was laid bare. The night stretched on, and as Watson dozed in his chair, Holmes stared into the flames, the locket heavy in his hand. The game was far from over, but the next move was his. Chapter 7. Mycroft's shadow. The fog hung low over London, a thick, grey shroud that seemed to press against the windows of 221B Baker Street. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with the scent of tobacco, and the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the room. Dr. John Watson, seated across from him, scribbled notes in his journal. The scratch of his pen, the only sound breaking the silence, the events of the past days, the black roses, the cryptic notes, the growing shadow of the order, had left them both on edge. Though Holmes's calm exterior betrayed little of the storm brewing within his mind, Watson glanced up, his brow furrowed. "You're unusually quiet, Holmes. What's troubling you?" "The woman in black, Eliza Vane's locket." Holmes's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "The locket, Watson. It's a curious thing, isn't it? A miniature portrait, finely crafted, yet deliberately obscure. And the face, did you notice the resemblance?" "Resemblance?" Watson set down his pen, leaning forward. "To whom?" Holmes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the locket, which lay on the table between them, its gold surface glinting in the firelight. He opened it with a delicate flick, revealing the small portrait inside a man, perhaps in his 30s, with sharp features and piercing eyes that bore an uncanny likeness to Holmes himself. Watson's breath caught as he studied it again. "Good Lord," he muttered. "He looks like you, Holmes. A relative, perhaps?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps, but not one I'm eager to claim." He snapped the locket, shut and rose abruptly, his dressing gown swirling as he crossed to the window. "We must speak to Mycroft, immediately." Watson blinked, startled by the sudden shift. "Mycroft? Your brother? What does he have to do with this?" "Everything," Holmes said, his voice low and sharp. "The Order of the Black Rose, the locket, the murders, they all point to a past that Mycroft knows more about than he's let on. Come, Watson, we're going to the Diogenes Club." The Diogenes Club was an anomaly in London's bustling social landscape, a place where silence was not just golden but enforced with an almost religious zeal. Its heavy oak doors and muted interiors exuded an air of secrecy, fitting for a man like Mycroft Holmes, who wielded influence from the shadows. As Holmes and Watson entered, a porter in a stiff black suit led them through dimly lit corridors to a private room where Mycroft awaited. Mycroft Holmes was a larger, more imposing version of his younger brother, with the same sharp intellect, but a demeanor that suggested he carried the weight of the empire on his shoulders. He sat in a high-backed chair, a glass of brandy in one hand, his eyes scanning a stack of papers. When he looked up, his expression was one of mild irritation, though Watson detected a flicker of unease. "Sherlock," Mycroft said, his voice smooth but edged with caution. "To what do I owe this unannounced visit? And with Dr. Watson, no less." Holmes wasted no time. He tossed the locket onto the table, where it landed with a soft clink. "Explain this, Mycroft." Mycroft's gaze flicked to the locket, and for a moment, his composure faltered. He set down his glass, his fingers lingering on the stem. "Where did you get this?" "From a woman named Eliza Vane," Holmes replied. "An actress with ties to the Order of the Black Rose. The portrait inside bears a striking resemblance to our family. Care to enlighten us?" Mycroft sighed, a rare sound, from a man who seemed to exhale authority. "You've been meddling in dangerous waters, Sherlock. The Order of the Black Rose is not a subject to be trifled with." "Then stop trifling and speak plainly," Holmes snapped. "Two men are dead, each with a black rose pinned to their corpse. A third name on their ledger narrowly escaped the same fate." This is no game, Mycroft. What do you know? Mycroft leaned back, his eyes drifting to the ceiling as if searching for the right words. The Order, he began, was formed in the early 18th century, a clandestine group sanctioned by the Crown to counter foreign espionage. They were effective, ruthless, and fiercely loyal, till they weren't. By the 1780s, corruption had seeped in. Members began pursuing their own agendas, blackmailing officials, manipulating trade. The Crown dissolved them, or so it was believed. Watson frowned. Believed? You mean they survived? Mycroft's lips pressed into a thin line. In a manner of speaking, the Order went underground, its members scattered. Some swore vengeance against those who betrayed them. Others simply vanished. But the symbol of the rose and serpent never entirely faded from certain circles. Holmes's eyes gleamed with intensity. And you knew this. You knew the Order might still exist, yet you said nothing when Sir Edward Harrow was found dead, with a black rose on his chest. I had no proof, Mycroft said sharply. Suspicions, yes, but nothing concrete. The Order was a ghost story, Sherlock, a relic of a bygone era. I couldn't risk stirring panic over mere rumors. Rumors? Holmes's voice was icy. A dockyard overseer with a Roseanne serpent tattoo, a ledger listing targets, a coded message about a reckoning. These are not rumors, Mycroft. They are facts. And now, this locket. Who is the man in the portrait? Mycroft hesitated, his fingers tightening around the arm of his chair. That, he said quietly, is a matter of family. Watson's eyes widened. Family? You mean before Mycroft could elaborate? A sharp knock interrupted. A young man in a Diogenes club uniform entered, his face pale. Mr. Holmes, sir, he said, addressing Mycroft. Urgent message from Scotland Yard. There's been another murder. Holmes's head snapped toward the messenger. Details. A banker, sir, Mr. Charles Whitmore, found in his office, poisoned. A black rose was left on his desk. Holmes and Mycroft exchanged a glance, the air between them crackling with unspoken tension. We'll continue this later, Holmes said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Watson, come. The banker's office was in the heart of the city, a fortress of wealth, with marble floors and mahogany furniture. Charles Whitmore's body lay slumped over his desk, a glass of wine spilled across his papers, the black rose pinned to his lapel like a grim signature. Inspector Lestrade stood nearby, his face drawn as he oversaw the constables securing the scene. Same as the others, Lestrade said as Holmes and Watson approached. No struggle, no witnesses. Just the rose, and a note. The Order blooms. We found a trace of poison in the wine. Likely aconite, like the others. Holmes knelt beside the body, his eyes scanning every detail. The banker's face was frozen in a rictus of pain, his fingers clutching a pen as if he'd been writing until the end. Holmes lifted the pen, noting a faint smear of ink on the man's cuff. He was working on something, he murmured. Something important. Watson peered over his shoulder. A diary, perhaps. Holmes flipped open a leather-bound book on the desk, its pages filled with meticulous entries. One passage caught his eye, written in a hurried scrawl. Meeting with the Thorn demanded. Return of the artifact, refused. Threatened exposure. The Thorn, Holmes said, his voice low. The leader of the Order. This is the first direct mention of them. Lestrade frowned. Artifact? What artifact? Holmes didn't answer. Instead, he pocketed the diary and turned to the room, his gaze sweeping over the shelves, the locked cabinets, the heavy safe in the corner. Watson, help me search. There's something here, something the Order wanted. They worked quickly, rifling through papers and ledgers. Watson found a hidden compartment in the desk, containing a single key engraved with a rose. Holmes, look at this. Holmes took the key, his mind racing. A vault. Whitmore was guarding something valuable, something the Order believes is theirs. Lestrade crossed his arms. You're holding out on me, Holmes. What's this about an artifact? And what's this order you keep mentioning? Holmes's eyes flicked to Lestrade, assessing. The less you know for now, Inspector, the safer you'll be. But rest assured, this is no ordinary killer we're dealing with. The Order of the Black Rose is a shadow cast by men who believe themselves above the law. Lestrade's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Just find them, Holmes. The public's getting restless. 3 murders in a week, all with that damned Rositz like a plague. As they left the office, Watson leaned close to Holmes. You didn't tell Lestrade about Mycroft or the locket. Why? Holmes's expression was grim. Because, Watson, I'm not certain how deep this goes. Mycroft's involvement, however peripheral, complicates things. Until I know more, we trust no one. Back at 2-1B, Holmes spread the banker's diary across the table, cross-referencing it with the ledger stolen from the Whitechapel meeting. The fire had died to embers, and the room felt colder, as if the weight of the case had seeped into the walls. Watson sat opposite, his eyes heavy but alert. The artifact, Holmes said, tapping the diary. Whitmore's entry suggests it's tangible, something the Order values highly, and the mention of the thornet confirms they're orchestrating this personally. Watson rubbed his chin. But why kill for it? If it's just a symbol, like the rose, it's more than a symbol, Holmes interrupted. The Order's actions suggest a deeper motive, revenge, perhaps, or a desire to reclaim power. The artifact could be a key to their plans, or a means to expose their enemies. He opened the locket again, staring at the portrait. And this? Man, Mycroft's reluctance to name him troubles me. He knows more than he's saying, Watson. Far more. Watson hesitated. You think Mycroft's hiding something deliberately? I think, Holmes said slowly, that my brother operates in a world of secrets, and some are too dangerous even for him to share lightly. But we'll pry them loose, one way or another. A knock at the door startled them. Mrs. Hudson entered, holding a telegram. For you, Mr. Holmes. From your brother. Holmes tore it open, his eyes scanning the brief message. Meet me at the city vault, midnight. Bring the key. M. Watson raised an eyebrow. The vault. How does he know about the key? Holmes's lips curled into a faint smile. Because, Watson, Mycroft is always watching. Come, we have an appointment to keep. The city of London at midnight was a labyrinth of shadows, its narrow streets winding past banks and counting houses. The vault in question was beneath a nondescript building, its entrance guarded by a single iron door. Mycroft was already there, his overcoat blending into the fog, a lantern casting a dim glow over his face. You're late, Mycroft said, his tone clipped. Holmes held up the rose-engraved key. And you're cryptic. What's in the vault, Mycroft, and why the secrecy? Mycroft's eyes flicked to Watson, then back to Holmes. The vault contains something the Order has sought for decades. I didn't tell you earlier because I wasn't certain it was relevant, but Whitmore's death changes things. He produced a second key, identical to Holmes's, and together they unlocked the door. The vault was a cavernous space, its walls lined with locked boxes. Mycroft led them to a specific compartment, which he opened to reveal a small, ornate box. Inside was a rose-shaped amulet, its petals carved from obsidian, its center, a deep red gem that seemed to pulse in the lantern light. The Rose of Anubis, Mycroft said, an Egyptian relic, stolen during the Napoleonic Wars. The Order believed it held power cult nonsense, of course, but symbols have a way of inspiring madness. Holmes examined the amulet, his fingers tracing its edges. And the Order wants it back. Why? Mycroft's face darkened. Because it was theirs. When the Order was disbanded, their assets were seized, including this. They see its return as a matter of honor and a rallying point for their cause. Watson frowned. But what cause? murdering merchants and bankers. It's bigger than that, Mycroft said. The Order's revival threatens the stability of the Empire. Their targets Harrow, the Overseer, Whitmore, Lord Clarence. They're all linked to a trade treaty that enriched certain families while impoverishing others. The Order sees themselves as avengers, righting old wrongs. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And the man in the locket? Who is he, Mycroft? Mycroft's jaw tightened. His name was Victor Holmes, our cousin. Watson's breath caught. Your cousin. But he was exiled 30 years ago, Mycroft continued, his voice low. A scandal involving the Order. He was one of their agents, brilliant but unstable. When the Order was dissolved, he was blamed for its failures and cast out. We thought he was dead. Holmes's face was unreadable. And now, Mycroft said, I fear he may be alive. And if he is, he's dangerous. Before Holmes could press further, a faint noise echoed from the vault's entrance's soft scrape, like a boot on stone. Holmes spun, his hand on his revolver. We're not alone. The shadows moved, and 3 figures emerged, cloaked in black, their faces obscured by masks bearing the Roseanne serpent symbol. One held a blade, another a pistol. The third, taller, stepped forward, their voice a low hiss. Give us the amulet, Holmes, or you all die. Holmes's lips curled into a cold smile. You'll have to take it. The fight was swift and brutal. Watson drew his own revolver, firing a warning shot that echoed in the vault. Holmes lunged at the nearest figure, disarming them with a precise strike to the wrist. Mycroft, surprisingly agile, grappled with the second, pinning them against the wall. The leader darted for the amulet, but Holmes was faster, tackling them to the ground. In the scuffle, the leader's mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of a scarred face and piercing eyes. Holmes froze for a fraction of a second, recognition flickering in his gaze. But before he could speak, the figure broke free, hurling a smoke bomb that filled the vault with choking fog. When it cleared, the attackers were gone, the amulet still in Holmes's hand. Watson coughed, steadying himself. Who were they? Holmes didn't answer immediately. He clutched the amulet, his mind racing. The Order is closer than we thought, he said finally. And Victor, if he's alive, he's not just a ghost. He's the architect of this. Mycroft, brushing dust from his coat, looked grim. You're in over your head, Sherlock. Leave the amulet with me. I'll ensure it's safe. Holmes's eyes flashed. Safe. Like the secrets you've kept. No, Mycroft. This stays with me until the Order is stopped. They left the vault in silence, the weight of Mycroft's revelation hanging between them. Back at 221B, Holmes sat by the fire, the amulet in one hand, the locket in the other. Watson watched him, sensing the turmoil beneath his friend's calm facade. Victor Holmes, Watson said quietly, your cousin. Do you think he's the thorn? Holmes's gaze was distant, fixed on the flames. If he is, Watson, this case is no longer just about murder. It's personal. The night stretched on, the fog outside thickening. As Holmes turned the amulet over in his hands, its dark petals catching the light like a promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. Chapter 8. The artifact's trail. The fog clung to the city of London like a conspirator, shrouding the narrow streets and towering stone edifices in a veil of secrecy. It was well past midnight, and the air was thick with the scent of damp cobblestones and coal smoke. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson moved silently through the labyrinthine alleys, their footsteps muffled by the mist. Holmes, clad in a dark overcoat, his sharp features half hidden beneath the brim of his deerstalker, led the way with the precision of a bloodhound. Watson followed, his revolver tucked discreetly in his coat pocket, his nerves taut as a bowstring. They were bound for a hidden vault in the heart of the city, a place rumored to hold the key to the Order of the Black Rose's motifs, a stolen Egyptian relic, a rose-shaped amulet of whispered occult power. Holmes had pieced together the trail, From the banker's diary, found among the papers of the latest victim, Mr. Reginald Thorne, a financier of considerable repute. The diary's final entry mentioned a meeting with the Thorne, the enigmatic leader of the order, and referenced a relic of unimaginable value. Holmes, ever skeptical of the supernatural, dismissed the rumors of occult power, but recognized the amulet's symbolic weight. If the order revered it, it was a linchpin in their scheme. The banker's vault, hidden beneath his offices in Lombard Street, was their destination. The city was eerily quiet, its usual bustle replaced by the hollow echo of distant hansoms and the occasional cry of a night watchman. Holmes paused at a corner, his eyes scanning the street ahead. "The entrance is concealed," he murmured, his voice low but clear. Thorne's diary mentioned a false panel in the basement of his counting house. "We must be precise, Watson. The order's reach is long, and I suspect they guard their secrets jealously." Watson nodded, his hand tightening on the revolver's grip. "Do you think they know we're coming?" Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "If they do, they underestimate us. Come." They slipped into a narrow passage beside Thorne's imposing office building, a structure of Georgian brick with blackened windows that loomed like a sentinel. The side door, as Holmes had predicted, was unlocked, a careless oversight or a deliberate trap. Holmes's gloved hand pushed it open, revealing a darkened staircase descending into the bowels of the building. The air grew colder as they descended, the smell of mildew and old paper replacing the fog's damp temps at the bottom. They found a cramped basement lined with shelves of ledgers and crates of documents. Holmes's eyes darted across the room, his mind cataloging every detail: the scuff marks on the floor, the faint scratches near a wooden panel, the absence of dust in a specific corner. He knelt by the panel, his fingers tracing its edges. "Here," he said, pressing firmly. A soft click echoed, and the panel slid aside, revealing a narrow stone passage. Watson's brow furrowed. "How did you know?" "Observation, Watson. The scratches indicate frequent use, and the lack of dust suggests recent activity. The order is meticulous, but not infallible." The passage was barely wide enough for one man, its walls damp and slick with moss. Holmes lit a small lantern, its feeble glow casting long shadows as they pressed forward. The air grew heavier, laced with the metallic scent of earth and something sharper, chemical, perhaps. Watson's heart quickened. He had seen Holmes navigate danger before, but this felt different, as if the very walls whispered of treachery. After what seemed an eternity, the passage opened into a small chamber, its centerpiece a heavy iron door engraved with a faint Roseanne serpent motif, the order's mark. Holmes examined the lock, a complex mechanism that would have deterred most. From his pocket, he produced a set of lockpicks, his fingers moving with the dexterity of a pianist. Within moments, the lock yielded with a satisfying clunk. The vault beyond was a stark contrast to the rough passage. Its walls were lined with polished oak shelves, laden with artifacts, ancient coins, jeweled daggers, and scrolls sealed with wax. At the center, on a velvet-lined pedestal, rested the rose-shaped amulet. Its obsidian petals gleamed in the lantern light, and at its heart, a blood-red gem pulsed faintly, as if alive. Watson felt a chill, though he dismissed it as imagination. Holmes approached the amulet, his eyes narrowing. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he remarked. "Egyptian, third intermediate period, likely a funerary piece. The gem is carnelian, not ruby, despite the rumors. Its value lies in its rarity and the order's obsession with it." Watson glanced around, uneasy. If it's a symbol, why steal it? Why not create their own? Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the amulet. "Symbols gain power through history, Watson. This relic, if tied to the order's origins, is a rallying point, a tangible link to their past. To steal it is to claim their legacy. To destroy it would be to break their spirit." He reached for the amulet, but a faint sound, a scrape of boot on stone, made him freeze. Watson's hand flew to his revolver as shadows shifted in the passage behind them. "Holmes," he whispered urgently, "we're not alone." Before Holmes could respond, 3 figures emerged from the darkness, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. Each bore the Roseanne serpent tattoo on their exposed wrists, and their hands gripped short, wicked blades. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You trespass on sacred ground, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low and menacing. "The order does not forgive." Holmes's expression remained calm, almost amused. "Sacred ground, a damp vault beneath a banker's office. Your order's taste in sanctuaries leaves much to be desired." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Mockery will not save you. The amulet belongs to us. Leave it, and you may yet live." Watson raised his revolver, his voice steady. "I suggest you reconsider. We're not here to negotiate." The scarred man sneered, and with a flick of his wrist, he signaled his companions. They lunged forward, blades flashing. Watson fired, the shot echoing in the confined space, and one attacker fell, clutching his shoulder. Holmes, with surprising agility, sidestepped a thrust and struck his assailant's wrist, sending the blade clattering to the floor. The scarred leader roared, charging at Holmes, but Watson tackled him, pinning him against the wall. The scuffle was brief but brutal. Holmes disarmed the second attacker with a precise blow to the elbow, while Watson wrestled the leader to the ground, securing his wrists with a length of cord from his pocket. The third man, wounded, scrambled to his feet and fled into the passage, his footsteps fading into silence. Breathing heavily, Watson secured the second attacker as Holmes retrieved the amulet, slipping it into his coat. "We must leave, Watson. The order will send reinforcements." Watson nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "What about these 2? Holmes glanced at the bound men, his expression unreadable. "They'll keep until Lestrade's men arrive. For now, we have what we came for." As they retraced their steps through the passage, Holmes paused to examine a crate near the vault's entrance. Inside, beneath a layer of straw, he found a folded map, its edges worn but legible. It depicted a sprawling estate in Surrey, marked with the same Roseanne serpent symbol. "An abandoned manor," Holmes murmured. "The order's true base, I wager." Watson's eyes widened. "Surrey, that's a day's journey." "Less, if we move quickly," Holmes replied, folding the map. "The amulet is a piece of the puzzle, but the manor holds the answers. The thorn is there, and with him, the heart of this conspiracy." They emerged into the fog-laden street, the amulet heavy in Holmes's pocket and the map clutched in his hand. The city was stirring now, the first light of dawn creeping through the mist. Watson glanced at Holmes, whose eyes burned with the intensity of a man on the hunt. "Do you think we're close to ending this?" Watson asked. Holmes's lips curved in a grim smile. "Close, Watson, but the game is far from over. The Thorn plays for high stakes, and we've just stolen his queen." They hailed a hansom cab, its driver bleary-eyed but willing, and set off toward Baker Street to plan their next move. The amulet, the map, and the looming shadow of the order weighed heavily on Watson's mind. He had faced danger with Holmes before, but this case felt personal, as if the very fabric of their world was unraveling. As the cab rattled through the waking city, Watson couldn't shake the feeling that the manor in Surrey would be their greatest challenge, yet a place where secrets bloomed like black roses, and death waited in the shadows. The journey back, 2221B, was silent, each man lost in thought. Holmes's fingers traced the amulet's contours through his coat, his mind racing through possibilities. The Order's motives were clearer now, a vendetta rooted in history, a relic as their banner, and a leader whose cunning rivaled his own. But the map to Surrey was the key, a thread leading to the heart of the conspiracy. Watson, watching his friend, knew that Holmes would not rest until the thorn was unmasked and the order's deadly bloom was crushed. Back at Baker Street, the fire was low, and Mrs. Hudson was still asleep. Holmes spread the map on the table, its details illuminated by the flickering lamplight. The manor, marked as Blackthorn Hall, was a sprawling estate, long abandoned, its history tied to a noble family that had fallen into ruin. Watson poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to Holmes. "What now?" he asked. Holmes took a sip, his eyes never leaving the map. "We prepare, Watson. The manor is their sanctuary, their fortress. To enter it is to walk into the lions. But we have the amulet, and with it, leverage. The thorn will come for it, and when he does, we'll be ready." Watson nodded, though his heart was heavy. The order's reach, the poisonings, the black rosette, all pointed to a reckoning larger than any case they had faced. He glanced at Holmes, whose face was a mask of determination, and felt a surge of resolve. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The night stretched on, and as Holmes pored over the map, Watson cleaned his revolver, the weight of their task settling over them like the fog outside. Blackthorn Hall awaited, a place of secrets and shadows, where the Order of the Black Rose would make its final stand. And Sherlock Holmes, with Watson at his side, would be there to meet it. The amulet, cold and heavy, seemed to pulse in Holmes's pocket, a reminder of the stakes. The Order's plan, whatever it was nearing its climax. The murders, the relic, the cryptic notes, all threads in a web that led to Surrey. Holmes's mind churned, piecing together the puzzle, while Watson watched, ready for the battle. Ahead, the trail was clear now, but the danger was far from over. As dawn broke over London, casting a pale light through the windows of 2-1B, Holmes folded the map and stood. "Rest, Watson," he said, his voice steady. "We leave for Surrey at first light. The thorn awaits, and we shall not disappoint him." Watson nodded, draining his brandy. The fire crackled, and the amulet gleamed faintly in Holmes's hand. The game was afoot, and the trail of the artifact would lead them to the heart of the Order's deadly secret. Chapter 9. The Manor of Secrets. The night air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson crouched behind a gnarled yew tree, their eyes fixed on the silhouette of the abandoned manor in Surrey. The moon, a pale sickle in the sky, cast faint light over the crumbling estate, its ivy-clad walls and shattered windows looming like a forgotten relic of a bygone era. The manor, once the seat of a minor noble family, now stood as a husk, its grandeur eroded by time and neglect. Holmes's sharp gaze traced the outlines of the building, noting the faint glow of candlelight flickering through a boarded-up window on the second floor. The Order of the Black Rose was here, and within those walls lay the answers to the conspiracy that had claimed lives across London. Watson shifted beside him, his breath visible in the chill. "Holmes," he whispered, "are you certain this is the place? It looks deserted." "Precisely why it is perfect," Holmes replied, his voice low and steady. "An abandoned manor, isolated from prying eyes, yet close enough to London for swift movement." The map from the banker's vault was unequivocal. This is their sanctum. The map, discovered in the hidden vault in the city of London, had been a hard-won prize. Its cryptic markings, deciphered by Holmes's relentless intellect, pointed to this precise location, a derelict estate known as Blackthorn Manor. The name alone had raised Holmes's suspicions, its echo of the Black Rose too blatant to be coincidence. The vault had also yielded the rose-shaped amulet, a relic of supposed occult significance that Holmes dismissed as superstitious nonsense, but recognized as a potent symbol for the Order. The ambush by Order members in the vault had nearly cost them their lives, but Holmes's quick thinking and Watson's steady hand with a revolver had secured their escape. Now, they stood on the precipice of infiltrating the heart of the conspiracy, Holmes adjusted his dark coat, blending seamlessly with the shadows. "We must move with utmost caution, Watson. The order is desperate. Their plans escalate with each murder, and the mention of a reckoning suggests a climax is near. We cannot afford discovery." Watson nodded, checking his revolver. "What's the plan?" "We enter through the servants' entrance at the rear," Holmes said, pointing to a shadowed corner of the manor. "The main doors will be watched, but a neglected estate like this likely has forgotten passages. Once inside, we locate their meeting place." The ledger suggested a chamber used for rituals. "If we can overhear their plans or identify the thorn, we may end this tonight." The ledger, stolen during their perilous infiltration of the Whitechapel meeting, had been a goldmine of information. Its coded names had revealed connections between the victims Sir Edward Harrow, the dockyard overseer, Lord Clarence, and the banker, all tied to a trade treaty that had enriched them while angering certain factions. The ledger also listed potential targets, including the Prime Minister, whose public speech in 2 days loomed as a likely stage for the Order's next move. Holmes had deciphered enough to know that the manor held the key to the Order's endgame. They crept forward, keeping low to avoid detection. The grounds were overgrown, brambles snagging at their trousers as they navigated the uneven terrain. The servants' entrance, a weathered door, half hidden by ivy, was unsecured, its lock rusted and broken. Holmes eased it open, wincing at the faint creak of hinges. The interior was dark, the air thick with mildew and dust. Holmes produced a small lantern, its shuttered light casting a narrow beam that revealed a narrow corridor lined with peeling wallpaper. "Stay close," Holmes murmured, leading the way. Watson followed, his revolver at the ready, his senses alert to any sound. The manor was eerily silent, save for the occasional drip of water or the scuttle of unseen vermin. They moved through the service corridors, passing abandoned kitchens and storerooms, until they reached a staircase leading upward. Holmes paused, his head tilted as he listened. A faint murmur of voices drifted from above, punctuated by the rhythmic cadence of chanting. "The ritual chamber," Holmes whispered. "Upstairs." They ascended the stairs, each step creaking under their weight. At the top, a heavy oak door stood ajar, the flickering light of candles spilling into the hallway. Holmes extinguished his lantern and peered through the gap. Beyond lay a large chamber, its walls draped in black cloth adorned with embroidered roses and serpents. A dozen figures in dark robes stood in a circle around a stone altar, upon which rested a single black rose, its petals glistening as if freshly dyed. The air was thick with the scent of incense, cloying and oppressive. Holmes gestured for Watson to remain silent, his eyes scanning the room. The figures chanted in a low, guttural tone, their words unintelligible but charged with fervor. At the head of the circle stood a tall figure, their face obscured by a hood, holding a staff topped with a rose-shaped ornament. Holmes's lips tightened. This could be the Thorn, the elusive mastermind behind the murders. The chanting ceased, and the hooded figure spoke, their voice resonant and commanding. "Brothers and sisters of the Black Rose, the reckoning is at hand. The betrayers of our cause have fallen, and soon the heart of this corrupt empire will wither. The Prime Minister's speech will be his last, and our bloom shall spread chaos across London." Watson's grip on his revolver tightened, but Holmes placed a restraining hand on his arm. They needed more information before acting. "The hooded figure continued, "The artifact is secure, its power ours to wield. Those who oppose us will face the Thorn's justice. The traitor within Scotland Yard has served us well, but his time grows short. All must be sacrificed for the bloom." Holmes's mind raced. The mention of the Prime Minister confirmed their target, and the reference to a traitor in Scotland Yard aligned with his suspicions from the ledger. The artifact, likely the rose-shaped amulet, was clearly central to their plans, though whether for its symbolic or supposed mystical properties remained unclear. He needed to see the faces of the Order members to confirm their identities and uncover the thorn. He signaled Watson to follow as he slipped through the door, keeping to the shadows along the chamber's edge. The black drapes provided cover, but the risk of discovery was high. They crouched behind a stack of crates, likely used to smuggle the Order's supplies, and Holmes peered at the gathered figures. Most were hooded, but one, standing slightly apart, had their hood lowered, revealing a familiar face a minor noble Holmes had seen at Lord Clarence's gala. The man's presence confirmed the Order's reach into high society. The hooded leader raised their staff, and the chanting resumed, louder now, almost frenzied. Holmes's eyes darted to the altar, where a small chest sat beside the black rose. If the amulet was inside, it could be the key to disrupting their plans. He whispered to Watson, "We need that chest. It may contain the artifact, or documents." Detailing their scheme, Watson nodded, his jaw set. "How do we get it, without being seen?" "Distraction," Holmes replied. "The crates, there's lamp oil in one. A small fire will draw their attention. We seize the chest and retreat to the passage we entered through." Watson hesitated, then agreed. "Be quick, Holmes. If they spot us, we're outnumbered." Holmes crept to the crates, his movements silent and precise. He found a small cask of oil, its seal intact, and carefully poured a thin stream onto the floor, leading to a pile of old tapestries. With a match, he ignited the oil, and flames leaped up, casting wild shadows across the chamber. The Order members gasped, their chanting breaking as they turned to the blaze. "Now," Holmes hissed. He darted to the altar, snatching the chest. As Watson covered him, revolver raised, the hooded leader shouted, "Intruders!" and the robed figures surged toward them. Holmes and Watson sprinted for the door, the chest tucked under Holmes's arm. A knife whistled past Watson's ear, embedding itself in the wall. But they reached the staircase and descended in a rush. The manor's corridors became a maze of chaos as shouts echoed behind them. Holmes led the way, his memory of the layout, guiding them back to the servants' entrance. They burst into the night, the cold air a shock after the stifling chamber. The flames had spread, and the manor's upper windows glowed with firelight. Slowing their pursuers, they ran through the overgrown grounds, not stopping until they reached a copse of trees a safe distance away. Holmes set the chest down, his breath ragged but his eyes alight with triumph. "Open it, Watson," he said. Watson pried open the chest, revealing a velvet lining cradling the rose-shaped amulet, its gold surface gleaming faintly. Beneath it lay a bundle of papers, including a coded letter and a list of names. Holmes scanned the list, his expression darkening. "More targets," he said, "and this letter it speaks of the Thorn's revenge and a betrayal from 30 years ago. This is personal, Watson, not merely political." Watson frowned, catching his breath. 30 years. That's before our time, Holmes. Who could hold such a grudge? "Someone with a long memory," Holmes replied, folding the letter carefully. "The Prime Minister is their final target, but this betrayal they speak of, it's the key to the Thorn's identity. We must return to London at once. The speech is in 2 days, and we have a traitor in Scotland Yard to unmask." They made their way to the nearby village, where they had stabled their horses, and rode through the night, the chest secured in Holmes's saddlebag. The manor burned behind them, a beacon of their narrow escape, but the weight of the mystery pressed heavier still. The Order of the Black Rose was unraveling, but the Thorn remained a shadow. Their motives, rooted in a past Holmes was only beginning to understand. As dawn broke over the rolling hills, Holmes's mind churned with the clues they had gathered: the Black Rose, the amulet, the ledger, the traitor, and now this letter hinting at a decades-old wrong. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one of vengeance and betrayal. With the fate of London hanging in the balance, the journey to Blackthorn Manor had been arduous. A midnight ride through winding country lanes, under a sky bruised with clouds. Holmes had chosen secrecy over speed, avoiding main roads to evade any spies the order might have posted. Watson, ever the soldier, had borne the discomfort with stoic resolve, though his thoughts lingered on the dangers ahead. The manor, as described in the banker's vault map, was a place of ill repute, rumored to be haunted by locals who avoided its grounds. Holmes had scoffed at such tales, but Watson felt an unease that went beyond superstition. The order's ruthlessness, evidenced by the murders of Sir Edward, the overseer, Lord Clarence, and the banker, suggested a fanaticism that chilled him as they had approached the manor. Holmes had outlined their strategy with his usual precision. "We are not here to engage, Watson," he had said, his voice cutting through the night. "Observation and acquisition are our goals. The order's numbers are unknown, and their desperation makes them unpredictable. If we are discovered, we retreat. No heroics." Watson had nodded, though his hand rested on his revolver, a comforting weight. "And if they give chase, then we ensure they regret it," Holmes had replied, a glint in his eye that Watson knew all too well, a mix of determination and exhilaration at the prospect of outwitting their foes. Now, as they hid behind the yew tree, Watson's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the electric tension of the moment. Holmes's calm was infectious, but the stakes were higher than ever. The Prime Minister's life, and possibly the stability of the British Empire, depended on what they uncovered tonight. The servant's entrance had been a gamble, but Holmes's instincts proved correct. The manor's neglect had left it vulnerable, its defenses eroded by time. Inside, the air was oppressive, the walls seeming to close in as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. Holmes moved with the grace of a cat, his lantern's beam a lifeline in the darkness. Watson followed, his senses attuned to every creak and rustle, his mind replaying the ledger's list of names. The order's reach was vast, spanning merchants, nobles, and now, it seemed, Scotland Yard itself. The thought of a traitor in Lestrade's ranks was a bitter pill, but Holmes had been unspoiled, his cynicism about human nature as sharp as his intellect. The chanting from the ritual chamber had sent a shiver through Watson, its cadence alien, yet purposeful. He had seen zealots before, in the heat of battle in Afghanistan, but this was different, a cold, calculated fanaticism cloaked in ritual. Holmes's focus, however, was unshaken. As they peered into the chamber, Watson marveled at his friend's ability to remain detached, his mind a machine sorting clues amidst chaos. The chamber itself was a study in contrasts. The opulence of the black drapes and gilded rose symbols clashed with the manor's decay. The altar, carved from dark stone, was the focal point, its black rose a stark emblem of the order's obsession. Watson's gaze lingered on the hooded leader, their staff a scepter of authority. Could this be the Thorn? The voice was deep, but its timbre was ambiguous, possibly disguised. Holmes's hand on his arm kept him grounded, a reminder to wait, to listen. The leader's words about the Prime Minister and the reckoning confirmed Holmes's suspicions. But the mention of the traitor in Scotland Yard was a jolt. Watson's mind raced. Could it be Lestrade himself? No, the inspector's loyalty, though often tested by Holmes's methods, was beyond question. But someone close to him, perhaps a senior officer, was feeding the order information, enabling their strikes with surgical precision. Holmes's plan to create a distraction was bold, almost reckless, but Watson trusted his friend's judgment. The oil fire was a calculated risk, its flames a beacon of chaos that turned the order's ritual into pandemonium. Watson's heart raced as they dashed for the altar, the chest, small but heavy in Holmes's hands. The knife that grazed his ear was a stark reminder of their peril, but Holmes's focus never wavered, his movements fluid as he navigated the staircase. The escape through the manor was a blur of adrenaline and instinct. The corridors, so silent before, now echoed with the shouts of their pursuers. Holmes's knowledge of the layout was there, salvation, guiding them through twists and turns, until they reached the servants' entrance. The fire had spread faster than expected, its heat licking at their heels as they burst into the night. The copse of trees offered temporary refuge, and Watson's hands trembled slightly as he opened the chest. The amulet's gold gleamed, its rose shape a mocking echo of the order's symbol. The papers beneath were a treasure trove, but the coded letter was the true prize. Holmes's eyes, usually so cold in their analysis, burned with intensity as he read the mention of the Thorn's revenge. 30 years ago, a time when Holmes himself was young, when the order was supposedly disbanded. The personal nature of the vendetta was a new thread, one that tugged at something deeper in Holmes's mind. The ride back to London was grueling. The horses pushed to their limits as dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and gray. Watson's thoughts were a tangle of worry and resolve. The Prime Minister's speech was a ticking clock, and the traitor in Scotland Yard a hidden dagger. Holmes, however, was silent, his mind already dissecting the letter, the list, the amulet. Watson knew that Holmes was close to unraveling the mystery, but the cost of this case was weighing on him. The mention of a betrayal from 30 years ago hinted at a connection closer to home than either of them had anticipated. As they reached the outskirts of London, the city's spires rising against the morning sky, Watson felt a surge of determination. The Order of the Black Rose was a hydra, its head striking from every corner of society, but Holmes was the blade to sever them. The manor had given them answers, but also new questions. Who was the Thorn? What betrayal drove this vendetta? And how deep did the traitor's influence run? The answers lay ahead, in the heart of London, where the final act of this deadly drama would unfold. Chapter 10. Betrayal. In the yard, the fog hung low over London, a shroud of gray that clung to the cobblestones and blurred the gaslights into hazy orbs. Sherlock Holmes sat at his desk in 221B Baker Street, the stolen ledger from the Order of the Black Rose open before him. Its pages, filled with coded names and cryptic annotations, had consumed his attention for hours. Dr. John Watson, seated by the fire, watched his friend with a mix of concern and curiosity. The air was thick with the scent of tobacco from Holmes's pipe, a faint curl of smoke rising as he traced a finger over the ledger's entries. "Watson," Holmes said, breaking the silence, "this ledger is a map of treachery. The Order's reach extends further than I anticipated. Look here." He tapped a page where a name, written in a cipher they had cracked the previous night, stood out. Inspector Gregory Finch, a senior officer in Scotland Yard. If he is indeed their mole. The Order has had eyes within our very defenses. Watson leaned forward, his brow furrowing. Finch. He's been with Lestrade for years. Decorated, trusted. Surely you're not suggesting I suggest nothing without evidence, Holmes interrupted, his voice sharp but calm. But the ledger does not lie. Finch's name appears alongside the victims, Sir Edward Harrow, the dockyard overseer, Lord Clarence, and now the banker. Each was marked for death, and Finch's role, I suspect, was to ensure Scotland Yard remained blind to the pattern. Watson shook his head, incredulous. If true, this is a blow to Lestrade, to have a traitor in his ranks. Holmes closed the ledger with a snap. We must act swiftly. The Order's next move is imminent. Another name on this list, a diplomat, is likely their next target. But first, we expose Finch. If he is the Order's eyes, blinding them will give us the advantage. The two men donned their coats and stepped into the foggy night, the chill biting at their faces as they hailed a hansom cab to Scotland Yard. The streets were quiet, save for the distant clatter of hooves and the occasional shout from a tavern. Holmes's mind raced, piecing together the threads of the case. The black roses, the rare poison, aconite, the cryptic notes about the Order blooms, all pointed to a meticulous plan, one that required inside knowledge of London's power structures. Finch, if guilty, was the key to unraveling it. At Scotland Yard, the gaslit corridors buzzed with the late-night activity of officers filing reports and messengers darting between rooms. Inspector Lestrade met them at the entrance, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Holmes, Watson, I hope you've got something solid. The press is hounding us about the banker's murder, and the public's in a panic over these blasted roses." Holmes's eyes gleamed with purpose. "We have more than something solid, Lestrade. We have a name, but I must speak with Inspector Finch immediately." Lestrade's expression darkened. "Finch, he's in his office. But what's this about?" "He's one of my best men." "Perhaps," Holmes said, his tone neutral, "or perhaps he is the reason the order has evaded you so effectively. Take us to him." Lestrade hesitated, his jaw tightening, but he led them through the maze of desks and filing cabinets to a small office at the end of the hall. Inspector Gregory Finch sat at his desk, a burly man with a neatly trimmed mustache and tired eyes. Papers were strewn before him, and a half-empty cup of tea sat cold at his elbow. He looked up as the trio entered, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," Finch said, rising. "Inspector Lestrade. To what do I owe this visit?" Holmes wasted no time. He placed the ledger on the desk, opened to the page bearing Finch's coded name. "Explain this, Inspector. Your name appears in a document belonging to the Order of the Black Rose, alongside those of murdered men. What dealings have you with this society?" Finch's face paled, but he quickly recovered, forcing a laugh. Some scribbled nonsense. I've never heard of this order, Holmes. You're barking up the wrong tree." Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "The cipher is no scribble. It matches the names of Sir Edward Harrow, the dockyard overseer, Lord Clarence, and the banker, all dead, all marked with a black rose. Your name is written in the same hand. Deny it if you will, but the evidence speaks." Finch's hand twitched toward a drawer, but Watson, ever vigilant, stepped forward, his revolver subtly visible beneath his coat. "I wouldn't, Inspector," Watson said quietly. Lestrade, his face a mask of disbelief, stepped between them. "Finch, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you're not mixed up in this." Finch's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. He sank back into his chair, his voice low. "I didn't want this, Lestrade. It started small, a favor here, a blind eye there. They paid well, and I needed the money. My wife's illness, the debts had piled up. They called themselves the Order, said they were righting old wrongs. I didn't know they'd start killing." Holmes's voice was cold. "You leaked information. You ensured Scotland Yard looked the other way, while the Order executed its plans. Who was the thorn? What is their next move?" Finch shook his head, sweat beading on his brow. "I don't know the thorn's identity. They never showed their face. Messages came through intermediaries' notes, coded letters. They paid me to pass along schedules, routes, anything about the victims. I didn't know they'd die, I swear." Fist slammed on the desk, rattling the teacup. "You betrayed us, Finch. Men are dead because of you." Holmes held up a hand, silencing Lestrade. "Tell me about the diplomat. The ledger lists and names Sir Henry Vaughan. Is he next?" Finch nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, they mentioned him. Said he'd be at the Foreign Office tonight, some private meeting. I told them his schedule last week." Holmes turned to Lestrade. "We must get to the Foreign Office at once. If the order follows its pattern, Sir Henry is in grave danger." Lestrade ordered Finch detained, his voice thick with anger. "Lock him in a cell. I'll deal with him later." 2 constables escorted Finch away, his head bowed in shame. Lestrade turned to Holmes, his eyes burning. "If you're right about this, Holmes, I owe you. But if Vaughan dies because we're too late—" "We won't be," Holmes said, already moving toward the door. "Watson, come." The cab ride to the Foreign Office was tense, the fog thicker now, swallowing the city in a ghostly haze. Watson checked his revolver, his mind racing with the implications of Finch's betrayal. Holmes, if Finch didn't know the Thorn, who's pulling the strings? This order, they're not just a band of killers. There's purpose here, something bigger. Holmes nodded, his eyes fixed on the passing streets. Indeed, Watson, the black roses, the poison, the targeting of men tied to trade and politics, a vendetta, but one with a grander design. The Thorn is no mere criminal. They are a strategist, and we are closing in on their endgame. At the Foreign Office, a grand building of stone and iron, they found the entrance guarded by a pair of constables. Lestrade flashed his badge, barking orders to secure the premises. Inside, the halls were quiet, the staff largely gone for the night. A clerk directed them to a meeting room, where Sir Henry Vaughan, a diplomat known for his work on trade treaties, was concluding a discussion with foreign dignitaries. Holmes scanned the room as they entered, his sharp eyes noting every detail of the polished mahogany table, the crystal chandelier, the half-empty glasses of wine. Sir Henry, a tall man with graying hair, stood at the head of the table, shaking hands with the German envoy. Holmes's gaze lingered on a wine glass at Sir Henry's place, its rim faintly stained with a dark residue. "Sir Henry," Holmes called, striding forward, "do not drink from that glass." The diplomat froze, startled. "Mr. Holmes, what is the meaning of this?" Holmes reached the table, lifting the glass to his nose. A faint, bitter scent confirmed his suspicion. "Aconite," he said, "the order's poison of choice. Someone in this room is their agent." The dignitaries gasped, backing away. Lestrade ordered the doors sealed, his men forming a perimeter. Holmes's eyes darted from face to face, searching for a telltale sign, a nervous glance, a bead of sweat. Then he saw it, a young aide, standing near the window, his hand slipping into his pocket. "You," Holmes said, pointing. "Step forward." The aide bolted, shoving past a constable and sprinting for a side door. Holmes and Watson gave chase, their boots pounding on the marble floor. The aide darted down a service corridor, knocking over a tray of glasses to slow them. Watson, faster than Holmes in a sprint, tackled the man just as he reached a back exit. The aide struggled, but Watson pinned him, wrenching a small vial from his hand. Holmes examined the vial, its contents a clear liquid with the same bitter scent. "Aconite, as I thought. Who gave you this? Speak, or you'll face the gallows." The aide, trembling, stammered, "I don't know his name. A man in a cloak, he paid me to slip it into the glass. Said it was for the order. I didn't know it was poison." Lestrade arrived, panting, and took the aide into custody. Sir Henry, shaken but unharmed, approached Holmes. "I owe you my life, Mr. Holmes. But what is this order? Why me?" Holmes's expression was grim. "You were targeted for your role in a trade treaty, one that evidently crossed the order's interests. But there is more to this. The Thorn, their leader, is driven by a personal grudge. We must find them before they strike again." As they left the Foreign Office, the fog seemed to thicken, mirroring the uncertainty of the case. Back at Scotland Yard, Lestrade interrogated the aide, but the man knew little beyond his orders. The vial, however, bore a faint mark, a rose entwined with a serpent, the order's symbol. Holmes studied it, his mind racing. "Watson," he said as they returned to Baker Street, "the diplomat's survival is a blow to the order, but they will not stop. The Thorn is close by, can feel it, and this mark." He held up the vial. "It's a taunt. They know we're hunting them." Watson frowned, his hand resting on his revolver. "What now, Holmes? If the Thorn is as clever as you say, they'll have a contingency." Holmes lit his pipe, the smoke curling around him like the fog outside. "We return to the ledger. There's another name, another target, and I suspect a clue to the Thorn's identity lies in their choice of victims. Tomorrow, We hunt again. But sleep eluded them that night. As Watson dozed by the fire, a messenger arrived with urgent news. Another murder, another Black Rose. The victim was a diplomat, not Sir Henry, but a lesser-known figure in the Foreign Office, found in his home with a note pinned to his chest. The order blooms, and scrawled beneath it, in a shaking hand, were the dying man's last words. The thorn is family. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he read the note, his mind flashing to the locket from Eliza Vane. The portrait of a man resembling a younger family, he murmured. Watson, we've been blind. The thorn is no stranger. They are tied to me, tied to Mycroft. This is personal. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing in the quiet room. Holmes stood, his silhouette sharp, against the firelight. Tomorrow, Watson, we confront the past. The thorn's reckoning is coming, and we will be ready. The fog outside seemed to pulse with secrets, and as Holmes stared into the night, he knew the final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The Order of the Black Rose was no longer a shadow, it was a threat he would face head-on, no matter the cost. Chapter 11. A Family Secret. The fog had not lifted from London's streets as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. John Watson sat in the dim glow of 2-1B Baker Street, the weight of the latest murder pressing heavily upon them. The diplomat's dying words, the thorn, his family, echoed in Holmes's mind, a puzzle piece that refused to fit neatly into the intricate web of the case. The locket from Eliza Vane lay open on the desk, its miniature portrait of a man with sharp features and piercing eyes staring back at them. Holmes's fingers traced the edge of the locket, his expression unreadable. Watson, nursing a cup of tea, broke the silence. Holmes, you've been staring at that locket for an hour. What are you thinking? This business about family, it's shaken you, hasn't it? Holmes's gaze flicked to Watson, a rare flicker of vulnerability crossing his features before his usual composure returned. Not shaken, Watson, focused. The diplomat's words, combined with this portrait, suggest a connection I cannot ignore. The man in this locket bears a striking resemblance to my cousin, Victor Holmes, a man I believed dead for over 2 decades. If he is the thorn, the Order's vendetta is not merely political, it is personal. Watson set his cup down, leaning forward. Victor Holmes, you've never mentioned him. Who was he? Holmes stood, pacing the room, his pipe unlit but clutched tightly in his hand. Victor was my cousin, older by a decade, a brilliant mind but prone to reckless ambition. He was involved in political circles in his youth, working under Mycroft's early guidance in matters of state. There was a scandal, something about misappropriated funds and a secret society. The details were hushed, as such things often are. In our family, Victor was exiled, sent abroad, and later reported dead in a shipwreck off the coast of France. Or so we were told. Watson's brow furrowed. And you think he survived? That he's behind the Order of the Black Rose? Holmes stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. The evidence points to it. The locket, found in Eliza Vane's possession, suggests a connection to the Order. The diplomat's dying words speak of family, and the ledger's targets men tied to trade and politics line with the kind of influence Victor once sought. But there is more. I found this among my old papers. He produced a yellowed letter from a drawer, its edges brittle with age. Watson took the letter, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was precise, almost elegant, but the tone was bitter. It read, Sherlock, you were always the favored one, the prodigy. They'll never see you for what you are, too clever for their small worlds. I tried to change things, to make them see, but they cast me out. One day, they'll pay for their betrayal. Victor Watson looked up, his voice low. This is from Victor. When was it written? When I was 16, Holmes replied. It arrived shortly before his supposed death. I thought it the ramblings of a broken man, but now, it reads like a vow of revenge. If Victor is the thorn, his grudge extends beyond the government to our family Mycroft, in particular, who likely played a role in his exile. Watson handed the letter back, his mind racing. So, what's our next move? If Victor is alive and leading the order, he's not working alone. The black roses, the poison, the precision, it's too elaborate for one man. Holmes nodded, slipping the letter into his pocket. We must confirm Victor's survival and locate him. Mycroft will know more than he's told us. His reticence at the Diogenes Club was telling he knows something of the Order's revival and Victor's role in it. We'll confront him again, but first, we must protect the next potential victim. The ledger lists another name, Sir William Carver, a trade minister. If the pattern holds, he's marked for death. The two men prepared to leave, the urgency of the situation driving them into the foggy dawn. The streets of London were waking, the clatter of carts and the shouts of vendors cutting through the haze. They hailed a cab to the Diogenes Club, where Mycroft Holmes held court in his silent sanctuary. The journey was tense, Watson's hand resting on his revolver, his eyes scanning the passing crowds for any sign of danger. At the Diogenes Club, the porter recognized Holmes instantly and led them to Mycroft's private room. Mycroft sat in his usual armchair, a stack of documents before him, his expression one of weary resignation as Sherlock and Watson entered. "Sherlock," Mycroft said, his voice low. "I expected you sooner. The diplomat's death, I presume." Holmes wasted no time. He placed the locket on the table, its portrait facing Mycroft. Victor Holmes. Alive, I believe, and leading the Order of the Black Rose as the thorn. Tell me what you know, Mycroft. No more evasions. Mycroft's eyes flickered. To the locket, a shadow passing over his face. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're correct, Sherlock. Victor did not die in that shipwreck. It was a convenient fiction, arranged to remove him from England after his disgrace. He was involved with the Order in its original forma, group I sanctioned to counter foreign espionage. But Victor grew greedy, using the Order for personal gain. When his actions threatened national security, I ensured his exile. I thought him gone, living quietly abroad. Clearly I was mistaken." Holmes's voice was sharp. "Mistaken. Men are dead, Mycroft. Sir Edward Harrow, Lord Clarence, the banker, the diplomat, marked with black roses, all tied to your old schemes. Victor is targeting those who betrayed him, and you're at the heart of it. What did you do to him?" Mycroft sighed, a rare admission of fallibility. "I did what was necessary. Victor's actions risked war with a foreign power. I had no choice but to act decisively. But I never imagined he'd return, let alone resurrect the Order. If he is the thorn, he's far more dangerous than I anticipated." Watson, silent until now, spoke up. "Dangerous enough to poison London's elite, to leave cryptic notes and black roses. What does he want, Mycroft?" Mycroft's gaze hardened. "Revenge, power. The Order's original purpose was to protect Britain, but Victor's vision was always grander. He believed he could reshape the nation, purge its weaknesses. If he's targeting trade ministers and diplomats, he's likely aiming to destabilize our economic and political standing. The black roses are his signature, a symbol of his twisted idealism." Holmes paced the room, his mind racing. "And Sir William Carver, is he next?" Mycroft nodded. "Likely. Carver was involved in the treaty that sparked Victor's downfall, a deal that enriched certain men while leaving Victor exposed. If the Order follows its pattern, Carver will be poisoned, and soon." Holmes stopped, his eyes glinting with determination. "Then we protect Carver and draw Victor out. Watson, we'll need Lestrade's men. Mycroft, you'll provide us with every detail of Victor's exile, names, dates, anything that might reveal his network. This ends now." Mycroft hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but be cautious, Sherlock. Victor was always cunning, And if he's survived this long, he's learned patience. He'll anticipate your moves. As they left the Diogenes Club, the fog seemed to close in, a metaphor for the uncertainty ahead. Holmes and Watson headed to Sir William Carver's residence, a grand townhouse in Mayfair. Lestrade met them there, his face grim after the betrayal of Inspector Finch. "Carver's been warned," Lestrade said. "He's under guard, but he's stubborn, insists on attending a dinner tonight at the Reform Club. Says it's critical for trade negotiations." Holmes's lips twitched in a rare smile. Perfect. The order thrives on public moments. If Victor plans to strike, it'll be there. Watson, Lestrade, will set a trap. The Reform Club was a hive of activity that evening, its opulent dining hall filled with politicians, merchants, and foreign dignitaries. Holmes, disguised as a waiter, moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning for any sign of the order's agents. Watson, stationed near the entrance, watched the guests, his revolver concealed beneath his coat. Lestrade's men, disguised as staff, patrolled the perimeter as Sir William Carver rose to give a toast. Holmes's gaze locked onto a woman in a black gown, her face partially veiled. She moved with purpose, her hand brushing against a glass of wine at Carver's place. Holmes signaled Watson, who intercepted her just as she reached the exit. "Madam," Watson said, his voice firm. "A word, if you please." The woman turned, her eyes cold. "I'm merely a guest, sir. You're mistaken." Holmes appeared at her side, his voice low. "Not mistaken. The faint scent of aconite clings to your glove. You're with the order? Where is the thorn?" She smirked, but before she could respond, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. A man in a dark cloak slipped through a side door, vanishing into the night. Holmes cursed under his breath. "Watson, hold her. I'll pursue." The chase led Holmes through the fog-choked alleys of Pall Mall, the cloaked figure always just out of reach. Holmes's long legs carried him swiftly, but the man was agile, ducking through narrow passages and over low walls. Finally, in a deserted courtyard, the figure stopped, turning to face Holmes. The hood fell back, revealing a face eerily familiar. Familiar Victor Holmes, older, weathered, but unmistakable. "Sherlock," Victor said, his voice a mix of bitterness and triumph. "You were always too clever for your own good." Holmes's hand tightened on his cane, ready for a fight. "Victor, the thorn. Why? Why this bloodshed? What do you hope to gain?" Victor's eyes gleamed with a manic intensity. "Justice. They took everything from me, my name, my future. Mycroft, the government. Those greedy merchants, they betrayed me. The order is my reckoning. And you, cousin, are in my way." Before Holmes could respond, Victor drew a blade, lunging forward. Holmes parried with his cane, the clash of steel ringing in the fog. The fight was brief but brutal, Holmes's precision outmatching Victor's desperation. With a swift maneuver, Holmes disarmed him, pinning him against the wall. "It's over, Victor," Holmes said, his voice steady. "The order ends tonight." Victor laughed, a hollow sound. "You think you've won. The order is bigger than me. The black roses will bloom again." Holmes bound Victor's hands, dragging him back to the Reform Club, where Lestrade and Watson waited. The woman in black had vanished, slipping through the chaos, but Victor's capture was a victory, as Lestrade took him into custody. Holmes felt no triumph, only the weight of a family's secret exposed. Back at 221B, Watson bandaged a cut on Holmes's arm, the only mark from the fight. "You got him, Holmes," Watson said, but he said, "The order isn't finished." "What now?" Holmes stared into the fire, the locket in his hand. Victor's words were a taunt, but there's truth in them. The order has roots we haven't yet uncovered. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. The black roses may fade, but their thorns remain. The fog outside swirled, hiding the city's secrets, but Holmes's resolve was unshaken. The game was far from over.